Kæru gestir, hjartanlega velkomin á þennan Fulbright fund. Bæði þið sem fylgist með rafrænt og þið sem eru með okkur hér í eigin persónu í dag. Viðburðurinn fer fram á ensku og skipti ég nú yfir. Dear guests, I warmly welcome you all to this annual May Fulbright Forum, where some of our U.S. grantees will talk about their Fulbright experience. Our May Forum is the largest one of the year, so we have both fellows and scholars here today from various fields. They're going to give us some fascinating insights into their work and lives in Iceland. It's always one of our favorite events of the year. Oh, didn't you unmute?
No.
Oh. Okay. Just close that. Okay. I want to welcome especially our 9 grantees who are going to be presenting here today. I should note that this is also being recorded. And those who are joining us virtually, if they have questions, can type the questions into Zoom and we'll see them there. Through Fulbright Iceland, we offer our outstanding grantees an opportunity to grow professionally and as individuals. Our grantees recognize that having a Fulbright, being a Fulbrighter, is a privilege and an honor, and they use this opportunity to the fullest. The grant period is, of course, a learning experience for grantees, but also an opportunity for them to share their knowledge and to engage locally, to share the best that the United States has to offer, and to immerse themselves in the culture of Iceland. Our grantees are ambassadors who work to increase mutual understanding between the U.S. and Iceland. They build bridges as well as collaborations and lasting friendships. Alas, for this group, the grant period will soon come to an end, but it has really been a pleasure to host them all. We have with us today 5 student fellows and 4 scholars, an impressive group, and they're all engaged in interesting and impactful projects. And I, for one, can't wait to hear what they have to share with us. So without further ado, let's get us started. We're going to start the day off with our Fulbright Fellows. These are students who are either in a university study program or they are here doing research projects. It's sometimes hard to be the first one up to bat, but I'm sure that Aden is up for the challenge. He is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, but came to us via Kazakhstan, where he had been most recently living and studying. And so he received the Fulbright Ministry of Culture Award and has been studying Icelandic as a second language at the University of Iceland. And it's fair to say that he has impressed us with his progress. But he is continuing in the program next fall, I believe. So let's hear what he has to say about his first year in Iceland.
Sæl og blessed. Ég býð ykkur öll hjartanlega velkomin í kynninguna mína sem síðastliðna árið mitt hérna á Íslandi. Þar sem flestir af ykkur skilja ekki íslensku á ég þannig að skipta yfir á ensku. So, hello everybody. My name is Aden. I basically welcomed you all and told you that I'm going to speak English now. But here I am, as Belinda told you all, studying Icelandic as a second language, which should really be Icelandic as another language. The name of that program has been mistranslated by the university itself. It's not a Tvindarfundur, it's a Viðbótar merkingar.
Yeah.
And I actually graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in Germanic and Slavic languages and literatures. So I study comparative literature primarily. I also am fluent in Russian, German, and now getting there in Icelandic. So I am the recipient of the Icelandic Ministry of Culture Award, which is aimed at helping American students who want to learn Icelandic come here and study not only for 1 year, but 3 years in the Icelandic as another language program at the University of Iceland. Now, I studied some Icelandic before I came here. I already had Old Norse, which has very similar grammar to Icelandic, Russian, and German. But I do want to say that in a year here, I've reached the B2 level in Icelandic, which means that I technically speak fluently. I'm not sure about that, but I feel pretty confident and feel good saying that. So Icelandic can be used for lots of different things. And before we proceed, I really want to tell you guys about how German and Russian have helped me to learn Icelandic and how this actually gives me a very certain advantage with teaching Icelandic in the future. So this sentence is meaningless. It has a meaning, but it's not relevant. So okkur var sagt að allt væri í lagi í eldhúsinu, en þegar við komum höfðu allir gluggarnir verið brotnir. So we were told that all was okay in the kitchen, but when we got there, all the windows had been broken. And this clause here, okkur var sagt, is an use of the impersonal passive, which translates directly into Russian's nam было сказано. The pronoun is the exact same grammatically as nam. Var is the exact same as было, and sagt is the exact same as сказано. So this is an example where my knowledge of Russian has helped me to understand an otherwise very complex concept in Icelandic, and in the future will help me explain to not only to Russian-speaking students why we have this in Icelandic. And the same with German. With this, all the windows have been broken. This is the passive in Icelandic, but it's the exact same as the Plusquamperfekt in German. So alle Fenster, waren alle Fenster gebrochen werden. So that's just a really cool example of how my linguistic background will help me approach Icelandic linguistically in the future. But perhaps more important to me is the literary side of things. People, unfortunately, sort of know me in my program as the Russian-speaking guy or the Swedish guy, because apparently I spoke Icelandic with a Swedish accent, which is very strange. But this semester we had the chance to read Góðir Íslendingar eftir Hornafjörður. And we were expected to just, write about the story of the book or whatever. But I did a comparative reading of the narrator's development with Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. I think it sort of surprised my professor, but I had a very good time with this. And it's interesting that after having been here for such a short time, I'm looking at Icelandic not from a lens that comes from within the Icelandic tradition, but from a comparative lens, which, if I'm being completely honest, is what Iceland needs more of. And now I will tell you about my current project and the project that I intend on writing my BA thesis, hopefully with Brynja Þorgeirsdóttir, about in my third year. And this is reading Iceland's Christianization through the lens of history art, mostly focusing on Kristnisögur and Völuspá. So when you see history art here, you probably think, okay, that's a little strange, right? And if any of you have read Russian literature, you most certainly know about Leo Tolstoy. War and Peace is not a book about just to be happy. It's not necessarily a book about war or peace. It's not a historical novel, but it is a book. And Tolstoy's main message to us is the problem with history and the way that modern historians tend to separate history from art. Now, most people think about this. If they're thinking about the difference between history and art, then the Icelandic saga is something that should be very interesting to them, because the Icelandic saga is, in its very nature, a literary text, but it's all we have to represent the history of Iceland. Therefore, history is presented to the modern reader, which we interpret as science, as something artistic, right? So, working on ideas built up by these guys, Erik Hollbach, who is considered the father of modern comparative literature, Hayden White, a huge name in comparative literature, especially in the US, and of course, Leo Tolstoy. I'm working to read the Christianization of Iceland, not just as a shift from the pre-existing pagan religion to Christianity, but rather the implementation of Ragnarök. So we're using Auerbach here to build a literary world from which to view history, and then analyzing the language of Wurzbau and Kristnesögur through that world we've built to read the Christianization as Ragnarök. Ragnarök, we imagine it as this violent end of the world that, fire giants, Fafnir, whatever. But we're using that to read the Christianization as something peaceful, right? It was a peaceful event, and that's why it stands apart. This violence that we see here in Ragnarök, I am arguing, is actually the rhetorical violence employed by the Icelandic parliament at the Christianization, which shows us that the world built by this choice is one founded in disjuncture. It is not history that exists as a scientific narrative, but as an artistic, cobbled together world in which ideas are harnessed, which allows us to navigate this sort of very complex dialectic that is history. And instead of trying to find a narrative, something that has happened and will determine what will happen next, instead we are building our own narrative, giving us the power to become agents rather than patients of history. That is the power of literature here. And I think that Icelandic literature gives us a lot to work with in this sphere. Future literary projects, because there are a lot, and I just wanted to go over them very quickly. How many of you are familiar with Halldór Halldór Laxness is the only Icelandic author to have received the Nobel Prize in Literature, and for a very good reason. He employs a certain genre called magical realism, a world that feels very real, but also sort of magical in the way that it's built up. Lots of things just don't make sense. And when I read Atomstöðina, the atom station, I was instantly reminded of Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, which is about the devil visiting 1936 Moscow. So I plan on doing a comparative reading of these two novels. Also translating Russian short stories, mostly Chekhov, into Icelandic, as I've noticed that I can't find them in Icelandic. Then a very weird one, but a reading of the devil across Russian, German, and Icelandic folklore. We'll be using The Master and Margarita, Faust, and how many of you know the story of Saundr on the Seal? Yeah. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, making that Icelandic saga practical. And just one more slide, but this is perhaps the most important thing that I'm working on here. As a student in the BA program, Icelandic as a second language, I've noticed that many of the students in my program are kind of categorized into their own group that isn't connected with the Icelanders. And frankly, I want to talk to more Icelanders because I think that's the best way to really gain proficiency in Icelandic. So I'm doing exactly that. I have become sort of the leader of Huldumal, the student association for students of Icelandic as a second language. And I'm working on planning an event that will unite the Icelandic students studying Icelandic with the people in my program, with the grad students doing medieval and Viking studies. So here's the flyer. Actually, I'm not meaning to advertise it here, but if any of you would like to come, the more people, the better, and tell everybody you know. Speaking on this matter, in my first year, I've been invited to 2 departmental meetings so far, and I'm getting to know all the professors, and I've been invited to coffee with them. So I'm really on the path to entrenching myself within this department and hopefully bringing about long-lasting change here. And thank you very much. Thank
you. And I think all of us could really feel your passion for what you're doing. It's absolutely great. I wanted to see if we have any questions from our audience members here on this. I'm interested in what you were talking, that there isn't that much interaction between, and I think that in general may pertain to just foreign students at the University of Iceland, right? And the regular students. So it would be interesting just to hear, have you discussed this with other Fulbrighters? Do you feel that they've had the same experience, or?
From our discussions, I think they've actually had more luck in talking to Icelanders than I have.
Yeah.
And
because maybe there are some Icelanders in their programs.
yeah, but there aren't Icelanders studying Icelandic as another language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's interesting, and the university should really support this effort in some way, I think. And
yeah, these are all scholars who are very proficient in their fields,
Yeah.
right? Most of the people in my program are just studying Icelandic.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we cannot wait to see. I look forward. Hopefully, you will bring your thesis. Give us a copy, and
I'd love to.
yes, we would love to see it. So, thank you so much. Oh, wait a minute! I forgot something. Oh my God! Hey, come back here. So, here is your certificate from Fulbright Iceland. Your little gift, swag gift, and now you can proudly wear your Fulbright Iceland pin.
Icelandic.
It. So our second Fulbright Fellow today is Sadie, who applied through Colton College in Minnesota. You know, for some reasons, we do get quite a few geology students applying to come to Iceland. Some strange reason. So those that make it through need to have very interesting applications. So Sadie proposed a research project with the University of Iceland's Earth Science Institute. And she has been studying the arrangement and architecture of volcanic rootless cones in order to use them as terrestrial analogues. In order to study rootless cones on Mars. I have no idea what she's doing. But it certainly got our attention. So Sadie, please tell us what these 9 months have meant for you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So yes, as Belinda was saying, I was studying Icelandic rootless cones as terrestrial analogs of Martian rootless cones in order to understand more about Martian environments and Martian hydrology. So what is rootless cone? There's two images of rootless cones on this slide, but one is an artist rendering of them on Mars, and then the other one is a real picture of them in Iceland in Mývatn. And so a rootless cone is a type of volcanic cone that forms through repetitive explosions as a lava flow enters some sort of wet environment and reacts with water or waterlogged sediments. So they're made of tephra, which is this fragmented material that comes from the explosion. If there's any geologists in the crowd, it's spatter and scoria. And then they're called rootless because they don't have this conduit down to the mantle like most volcanoes would have. Instead, the lava that is making them is just coming from another volcanic eruption happening somewhere else that's kind of running into some sort of wet environment and creating these explosions. And now they're really interesting for planetary scientists because they are very indicative of a certain type of environment. So they only form when lava interacts with water. So and they have this very specific morphology. So if you find a rootless cone, and if you can prove that it's a rootless cone on another planet through satellite imagery, you can say that area would have some sort of water or ice in the subsurface, which is really interesting. And they see a lot of potential rootless cones on Mars, even as close as the equator, whereas usually people think of the polar ice caps on Mars, but instead there's evidence for water in different places. So how do rootless cones form? As I was saying, there's this lava flow that runs into some sort of wet environment you see in the first figure. And the lava flows, you can think of them as little fingers heading off into this wet environment. And then the rootless cones kind of form going backwards up the little fingers as they use up more water and then need to move to another spot that has water to react with. And then in the second figure, you can see a little closer up of how that happens. We have this lava tube that's inflating right here, and then it's pressing down on the basal crust of the bottom of the lava tube. And then at a certain point that will break and the lava is exposed to these waterlogged sediments. And then there's this dynamic mixing process that occurs between the water and the lava, and you get these repetitive explosions as the water is used up, and then it fills in the area again, and then it explodes, and then it fills in the area again, and then it explodes. So rootless cones have like these many layers of different explosions that have happened on top of each other. So the research question that I was looking at was how does the spatial distribution and cone morphology and cone shape affect the rootless cone presentation in Iceland and then on Mars? And I used 4 locations in Iceland. The first is Reyðarfjörður, right near Reykjavik. And it was really nice because I could do a bunch of field work there. I was looking at sediment analysis, class analysis, and then also doing a lot of geospatial studies. And it was really good to be able to look at satellite imagery and then go to the field and see if what I was mapping, because you can get kind of different information from geospatial analysis versus looking on the ground. And then it was really lovely. I had a bunch of support. This is my lab mate Glenn, who was helping me out doing some sample collection. And then this is my volcanology class. I sat in on a volcanology class in the fall, and we went to Reyðarfjörður, which was really awesome for my research. So to start out, one of the projects that I was looking at is Reyðarfjörður and how the sediments, there's this interesting interplay between sediments and tephra. So this is a wall of a rootless cone, and rootless cones are split up into bed pairs. So these are 3 bed pairs we see here. And then if you look, there's all these little sediment clumps throughout the tephra. So the sediment are these little spots that I've highlighted in yellow. And then I was trying to see what overall patterns we can see between the sediments and the tephra, and try to understand a little bit more about how the process of explosion is affecting the sediments and see that mixing process in the wall. And so you can kind of see that as the explosions continue, they lose intensity. And so at the very beginning, it's a very intense explosion that's able to break apart so many sediments that you see this fine dusting over all the class. Whereas up here, it's more in clumps because the explosivity is waned, and so it's not able to break apart as much. All right, so now moving on to the geospatial part of this research. So these are some cones at Reyðarfjörður, and we can see these are the craters. So there's 5 craters that you can see in this picture, and you have a little horse for scale. And then this is what it would look like in geospatial analysis software. And so using a bunch of different parameters slope and the slope of the slope and flow accumulation and drainage divides and curvature and the slope of the curvature and all different things, I mapped out these craters and also the cones, which aren't pictured here because it just made it really confusing to look at. But you can see how it would look in the field and then how it looks on geospatial analysis software. And then using that, I could get a lot of data about the cone shape and the cone morphology, and I ended up using these ratios of cone diameter versus crater diameter, and then cone height versus crater diameter. And then I used this other analysis called the nearest neighbor ratio that looks at the spatial distribution of the craters. And nearest neighbor ratios really just tell you about the reservoir of water beneath the cone that's making for this explosion. And so with the nearest neighbor ratio, you have 1 is a random distribution, and then under 1 is a cluster distribution, and above 1 is dispersed. And so with Reyðarfjörður, you can see we have a low cone diameter to crater diameter, which means less dispersal of tephra around the craters, and then also a low cone height to crater diameter ratio, which means stronger explosions and less buildup of tephra. And then we see this almost 1 nearest neighbor ratio, so it means very random distribution of craters. So now moving on to our next site, Laki. This was kind of a little sub-study that I did, looking at different volcanic features around Laki and seeing if I could differentiate them from rootless cones, because these different types of volcanic constructs, tumuli and lava rise pits, form in very different ways from rootless cones. So if I wasn't able to differentiate them from geospatial in geospatial software, like not really doing the job correctly. So you can see that using these different analysis and parameters, that they're very differentiable, and the ratios and the nearest neighbor analysis is very different. So that was kind of like a very useful check. And then just focusing on the rootless cones, which is like the overarching, we're trying to see trends across rootless cones in Iceland, we can see that there's a higher cone height to crater diameter ratio than at the Adler, and then which indicates like less intense explosions at Laki, and then a moderate tephra dispersal. And we can also see that they're clustered like they were at Adler. And now moving on to our last two sites in Iceland, we see they're both they both show clustering, and then with the ratios, there's indicating strong intensity, low tephra dispersal in the first spot, and then weaker intensity and high tephra dispersal. And I should note, these are like screenshots or like snapshots of the maps I did. I mapped like very, very large areas, but this is just like zooming in on a little area. So some takeaways from the Icelandic rootless cone groups is that we see these very variable shapes. The ratios span kind of large ranges. But however, even though you see all these different shapes, we see still a very clustered spatial distribution, and possibly that's because of this like patchy hydrologic environment that's informing where the cones can originate. So now moving on to Mars, I mapped 3 locations in this area on Mars, in case you're planning a trip there and want to go visit. And here are 2 of the ones that I mapped. We can see right off the bat, it's really interesting because they're the nearest neighbor analysis showing how distributed they are. We see dispersed and weakly clustered, basically random. So that's a big difference from the Icelandic cones that were very clustered. And then when looking at the ratios, you see moderate intensity of explosion, low tephra dispersal, and then low intensity, moderate tephra dispersal. And so potentially this dispersion, if we just think about some takeaways from looking at Mars versus Iceland, we see this greater variety in spatial distribution in the Martian cones versus the Icelandic cones. And so potentially that's due to differences in gravity and atmospheric pressure. And then also potentially we're looking at like large sheets of ice causing these rootless cones instead of like little patchy wetlands or lakes like in Iceland. Which kind of makes sense for like how you think about Mars having water. So some lessons I took away from this research, this is just a picture of my notebook from a day where I was doing I was trying to figure out this like algorithm to look at the rootless cones. And I think it's notable that there's like a lot of like mistakes and like crossed out spots, and like I went down like a million rabbit holes and like tried a lot of things that didn't work, and it was like very infuriating at times. But I think that's like a very good lesson to take from here about like how to do research. And like, yeah, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes and it's okay. And I think that's also very applicable to like living in another country and just like making a fool of yourself and trying new things and exploring every possible avenue. So I definitely experienced that being here. So yes, so I had so many wonderful adventures here. I had such a good time. And I was doing this like app called 1 second of the day, where you take like 1 second of your day every day. I didn't do a very good job of actually doing it every day, but it's kind of a fun thing to like look back at my time in Iceland. Yeah, and it was so fun to just explore, and yeah, I had so much fun. So thank you very much.
Thank you, wonderful. I think we all know, I mean, I know now, but it was But, yeah.
So with the what you found on Mars,
Yeah.
you're based on, I guess, your initial analysis of like what a rootless cone looks like.
Mhm.
You have pretty good confidence that they are rootless cones, or is it?
Yeah. Well, they have very similar morphology,
Okay.
shape. That's why we're looking at those ratios, because they are kind of indicative of looking at a rootless cone versus, especially on Mars, sometimes the issue is like you can confuse a crater for like a meteor hitting crater versus like an explosive crater. So that is kind of difficult, but you do see like this you do see like this similar morphology across Icelandic cones and Martian cones.
Okay.
But it is always a possibility that, because all the spots I looked at were like areas that were tagged as being rootless cones, but they were like all potential. So
Okay.
yeah.
So could one of the Mars rovers that are doing all the drilling and so forth, are any of those near any of these sites? Is it
No.
something? Okay.
They haven't been to any rootless cone site, I think, because they're just not around there and Mars is huge. But I think a lot of the rootless cone sites are like potential landing spots, which is also a really good reason for looking at rootless cones because they kind of tell you where the water is. So yeah, a lot of the rootless cone sites are where they're thinking about landing.
Cool. Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we had Emma.
Yeah.
I know this is kind of a dumb question. Are there any other terrestrial analogues on Iceland?
I would not be able to speak on that, but for sure, yes. Yes. Yes.
Yep.
So this could be like a rumor, but I heard there was gravel mining at Isabella.
Oh, yes.
So does that make it more difficult for you to analyze the
Yeah.
distribution?
Yeah, so the Adler was mined in World War II. It's like not, that's also a reason why the spatial distribution showed like random, whereas everybody else, all the other sites in Iceland were clustered. Because it was mined, it's like not the most amazing spot ever, but it does like, it was a really useful spot for me to learn how to map it in the beginning, and then like you can kind of take it with a grain of salt. Yeah.
You have one question online
Okay.
from Henry Stevens. Is there a way to age the cones so you could find a cone and get an estimate of when they formed?
Mostly you think about where, because the lava flow that formed it, so you just think about the volcanic eruption that formed it, and then that's how you date the rootless cones. Yeah.
Was there anything else back there? No. All right. Well, I mean, this was fascinating, and we look forward to see. What are your plans?
I'm starting a PhD program in June at Duke University.
Fabulous.
That's exciting.
That's wonderful. And I love the 1 second delay. We should steal that and have like, yeah.
It was very fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. But thank you so much. Oh, I forget again. Yeah, it's a good thing I'm getting. Sadie, so here you go. Your little swag from Fulbright Iceland and your Fulbright Iceland pin, which I hope you will wear proudly. Okay. So next up is Emma, a graduate student, a graduate of the University of Southern Maine. And she's studying for her master's degree in international affairs at the University of Iceland. And she, like Aden, will continue here in the fall, although I've just heard some new news. She'll be coming back to Iceland a bit later. I'll let her tell you about that. And so she's been utilizing her time well here in Iceland. She's taken part in things like the Model NATO conference. She participated in the Arctic Circle Assembly. And we sent her also to Brussels for a Fulbright seminar on NATO and the EU. I know she's also been exploring and making connections here. So let's hear what she has to say about her time in Iceland so far.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So I am here in Iceland studying international affairs, as Belinda just said. I largely focus on great power politics in the Arctic region. That's why Iceland. People often ask me why international affairs in Iceland. That would be why. And I'll talk more about why the Arctic is so important right now. So I am a master's student with a full-time class schedule that thankfully just finished up yesterday with my last exam. Very excited to have the first year done. And so I just have some of the class, or all of the classes I've taken here. My fall 2025 was quite busy. Just to say a little bit something about some of my classes, my fall was fantastic in learning a lot about Icelandic history, Icelandic politics. I had a lot of Icelandic professors. I have a lot of Icelandic peers in my classes. So it's wonderful to hear about some of the ongoing political issues from their perspective and from very different perspectives as well. There's a lot of political diversity in our classes. I also took an extra class, which is actually the first one, hybrid threats. And I'm really glad I took that because it's kind of expanded my knowledge in the security arena, and got me to think more about disinformation warfare, which is a whole other thing, but very, very interesting. Very glad I took it. And then this spring, you can see, was very math focused. Not my favorite thing in the world, but it's done. And I also took a negotiations class, which was a new thing for me. I think it's a really interesting thing to learn kind of about the theory and tactics behind international negotiations. So that was fun, and I'm grateful that Howie has that in their curriculum as a required course. And then I, for being a humanities student, wrote a bunch of papers. All of these are for class. None of them are going to be published. But there were a lot of fun ones. I think potentially the most relevant to my Fulbright proposal here was the first final paper here, Iceland and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Regime, which I had a lot of fun writing. It was a nice deep dive into Iceland's role in NATO, their alliance with the US, and the nuclear non-proliferation regime, which essentially just means the norm that nobody else builds nuclear weapons, which is currently very much under threat. But I'll talk about that more in a second. So as you can see, I wrote a lot about the US, Russia, Iceland, again, focusing on that great power politics relationship that's going on here in the Arctic. I also kind of tried to branch out a little bit. I wrote about humanitarian aid in Yemen right before the Houthis got involved in the war. So that was an interesting policy memo to write that had to be updated the day it was due. Always a fun thing with the international relations, as well as the uranium enrichment negotiations, which are ongoing in theory. So it's been a huge variety, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad we do work on policy memos. It's something I worked on in the Senate, and I think it's a fantastic skill for anybody who's going into politics to have. Grateful that I had some background experience. A lot of my classmates didn't. So it was nice to work with them. And then where are we now? Oh, that all got squished together. Interesting. Okay. So I say quite frequently when I was submitting my Fulbright grant proposal back in October 2024, I had no idea how things would go over the past year and a half. And it feels like a kind of terrible coincidence that this area of study is so relevant today. Since the end of 2026, or since the beginning of 2026, sorry, the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, New START, expired, which has been a decades-long treaty series with Russia to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons both of our countries have, reduced us from tens of thousands of nuclear warheads to just over about 13,000 right now, combined. So highly successful in its goals, and it very unceremoniously expired, and there's currently no new negotiations, and unfortunately they're unlikely to start anytime soon. There's also been repeated use threats, and threats just means multiple leaders have threatened to use nuclear weapons in war, which undermines the non-use norm. So the idea that we don't use nuclear weapons in war, which hasn't been done since Japan. And those threats are coming. They're coming from Russia in the Ukraine-Russia war. We also had a threat recently to wipe out an entire civilization. And many scholars saw that as a threat of nuclear use. So not doing so great. Unfortunately, this coming October is actually going to be the 40th anniversary. Yes, I have that written there of the Reykjavik summit between Reagan and Gorbachev, which was kind of the start of talks between Reagan and Gorbachev to come up with these nuclear agreements to reduce arms in the US and Russia, or Soviet Union at the time, which have brought us to where we are today, or where we were 2 years ago. And then threats to Greenland in the past year have also brought the Arctic to the forefront of everybody's minds. I mean, we saw the French president speaking Greenlandic at a conference, and I know a year ago I never would have expected that. So there's a lot going on in this region. There's a lot going on globally in terms of nuclear nonproliferation. Very glad to be here. Again, as I said, it's a unfortunate coincidence. And then moving on to the fun stuff. So as Belinda mentioned, I've been to a bunch of conferences over the past year, starting off strong with Model NATO. This was the first ever Model NATO held here. And I went with Cam, which was a super fun experience. I represented Poland, which was cool. I've never represented them before in one of these simulations. And then I also went to the Imagine Peace Forum, which I would highly recommend for anybody who's staying here. They do a great, like they bring in some great speakers. I don't know if there's any How I Met Your Mother fans in here, but she was in the cast. Also an amazing humanitarian activist. Had me crying at 10 a.m. Okay, though. And then the Arctic Circle Assembly, amazing. I've been wanting to go to this for a couple of years, and I'll be back at it this fall, which I'm very excited for. But I also got to reconnect with some Mainers, which was fantastic to see so many Maine people here. I've said a few times we have some sort of like spiritual bond between Maine and Iceland. And then, let's see, okay. I went to the Fulbright EU NATO seminar, which was amazing. It was so cool to see some of these places which we discussed in class, like in person, and how they work, and meet some members of parliament, as well as some people from the US representation in NATO. It was an amazing experience. I got to meet a lot of other Fulbrighters, which was cool, and talk about their projects. Some of them were in politics, some of them were in cancer research. So a really cool experience that I'm super grateful I got to participate in. Then recently I went to Yalta holds a NATO school, and that was a lot of fun. My friend Tina, who's Icelandic and she's on the Yalta board, she translated a lot of it for me, which I really appreciate because I'm not at the point where I can understand Icelandic. And I'll be going to the Arms Control Negotiation Academy, which happens here every day. Then some fun cultural exchange stuff. I live in a dorm that I share a kitchen with 10 other people from all over the place. So we're always cooking for each other. We had a Thanksgiving meal together. I got to celebrate New Year's as well as Christmas and the first night of Hanukkah here. And that was a fantastic experience. And I've been outside of Reykjavik a bunch. Sadie and I have traveled, I think, to almost every corner of the West Coast. And that's been amazing. It's been, I love hiking, so it's been nice to get out and do that. And we can come back to pictures maybe. What comes next? Belinda mentioned, I just heard that I got into the Erasmus exchange at Sciences Po. Which has an amazing international relations and international security program. So I'm very excited to take some classes there and get another perspective from another nuclear weapons state, which is actively proliferating. Not to bring that back to everybody's minds. And I also was accepted into the Lieber Erickson program. So I will be continuing next year here with them. I'm very excited for that as well. That's all. Great.
Let's see if we have some questions in the audience. Anybody have anything? I would actually like to start and ask you, I mean, the work that you're doing is so interesting. I don't know how much of a perspective you gained in your first year, but if you look at areas where Iceland and the United States could do more in terms of cooperation, is there anything in particular that you see where, and especially in defense and security and all of that, is there expertise from the US that's needed here, or expertise in Iceland that could be useful for the US, that kind of thing?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of academic exchange. There's a group of people in Maine now doing Arctic related stuff, and we just got an email like, what are some actionable ideas that you all have? I have to send them an email that they're going to do more academic exchanges. Fulbright is a wonderful opportunity, but it's very selective, and it would be amazing if more people can participate in that. And then in terms of defense and security, the US and Iceland have a very close relationship, of course. Iceland's agreement with the US in regards to defense is one of the pillars of Iceland's security in general. Cooperation right now is difficult in some ways, but I think something I hear a lot is further cooperation in terms of the search and rescue team here is amazing. Cooperation in the NATO bubble is always amazing. And so just where Iceland can kind of support some of the stuff that the US is able to do. I think we've heard recently that there's people who would like to start a military here. We had somebody come in and lecture about whether or not Iceland will be able to build an army. I don't think that's very feasible in a country of 400,000 people, nor do I hope it's ever necessary. But having some of the expertise from the US in terms of knowing about these things, cybersecurity is a huge one that Iceland can lead in without having a massive population and without building up their military in the same way. And I think Iceland will also be cooperating more with Europe, at least over the next few years.
But I mean, another idea that's brought up is more like civilian defense. So that, do you think that's something that could be feasible? That, there's some just training for Icelanders, especially younger Icelanders, so that in the case of something major happening, that they would be able to, for a couple of days or something, to,
Yeah, I mean, Iceland plays a huge role in NATO's part in like the search and rescue civilian defense because Iceland has the unique characteristic of being on a very unstable land. And so they have experience in terms of rescues for volcanic eruptions, or the Icelandic Coast Guard is another fabulous resource for NATO. And then in terms of building up civilian security, I think like as of right now, Icelanders go, if they're interested, to defense academies in Sweden or Norway. I don't know if they do the same thing in the US. I haven't heard of it personally, but I guess that would be another avenue, is Icelanders going to be a part of our war colleges back.
Interesting, yes. Yes?
You mentioned the skills you learned in the negotiations class. What are like those types of skills?
Oh my God, I mean, so many negotiations theories. And the fun thing about negotiations theories is that everybody can use them. I would say the two things we are told most often in negotiations is to write your opponent's victory speech for them, which I think is really interesting because it helps you understand it, and you can't negotiate on a basis that's going to come to a actually beneficial conclusion without understanding where your opponent is coming from. So I think that's one. And then, oh my God, so many. Half the time it's just like, be nice to people. They'll be more given. There was another one I was thinking about this morning. I'm blanking now, but I hear it like every time I listen to the news now. It's like, negotiation thing.
I'm sure one of the things, it's one of the, I think, for me at least, what many long ago when I was taking was that you never should look at negotiations as a zero-sum game.
Yes,
right? Yes,
that's
exactly.
absolutely
Yeah,
one.
yeah, exactly.
That's like
Yeah.
class number one.
Yeah.
It's not a
exactly.
zero-sum game.
It's
Expand the pie. is
Yes.
what we said.
Yes, exactly. Was one maybe final, how did, having, done your studies previously in the US and now here, did you see like differences between being a student here and there in terms of classes, how they're conducted and that type of thing?
I'm lucky because I have the educational experience of the US, Norway, and now Iceland. So I would actually say Iceland is pretty similar to the US in how classes are structured and generally the expectations and how it's broken down. One thing I did notice is student expectations regarding participation. And that I thought really interesting. In Norway, nobody participated in class. You show up to the lecture, you listen to the lecture, then you leave. At home, I think most of us as Americans know it's pretty participation focused. Here it's a mixture, and I think I have a lot of international students in my courses. And a lot of the people are not expecting to participate. They don't want to have to speak. They don't want to do group work or whatever, which is totally understandable at 8 a.m. But I talked to a couple of my professors about this, and I think there's
but I think that's one of the things that's very valuable, for example, in our bringing in US professors. It's important to be able to talk about your subject, right? And So, but I'm glad to hear that there is some, because that is one of the things that many Icelandic students say when they go to the US. It's new to them, it's shocking to them, but then they absolutely love it.
Yeah. I think by the end of my time, like more people were participating in class and it was a much more communal experience.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Your Fulbright pen.
Thank you.
Your Fulbright certificate. And your little swag. All right, guys, so zipping right along here. Now we're going to move on to our two Fulbright-NSF Arctic Fellows. So Fulbright Iceland is proud to be the only commission that offers joint Fulbright National Science Foundation grants. And this can be really meaningful for students who are taking their first steps in Arctic research. First, we're going to hear from Cameron Essex, another one of our fabulous geology students who comes to us from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And during their time here, Cameron has done field work, lab work, classroom work. I believe he's taken up knitting as well. So Cameron's been busy. Cameron is hosted by the University of Iceland Institute of Earth Sciences for a project that revolves around the investigation of glacier retreat and mantle flare-up. So take it away, Cameron.
Hi there, Belinda. I'm also a geology student that has a very mouthful title, but in short, I'm trying to understand the relationship between volcanoes and climate in Iceland. And I've been lucky enough to have Háskóli Íslands host me and Fulbright support my salary while I'm here, and also the Leifur Eriksson Foundation to support fieldwork, lab work, and any additional costs. Oh, is the audio on? Okay. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the motivation for my project is, does human-induced climate change increase volcanic eruptions or glaciers in Iceland? And so the most notable one is the Eyjafjallajökull eruption in 2010, when lava started to become in contact with ice, and it created jökulhlaups, which are glacial outburst floods, and ash production capable of disrupting air travel for 6 weeks. So this is really damaging to Iceland's economy because it's an important travel hub for European and African countries. So we need to study how these effects will shape the future. And so a little bit of a climate history, Thal of New, then and now. Iceland used to be fully covered in ice around 20,000 years ago. So this blue line here shows the extent of the Iceland ice sheet, the largest extent. And since 20,000 years ago, it has started to shrink. And the yellow line shows around 14,000 years ago where it was. And then the Iceland's 5 main glaciers, Vatnajökull, Hofsjökull, Langjökull, Mýrdalsjökull, and Dingjökull in the northwest are what remain of Iceland's glaciers. So 10% of Iceland is covered by glaciers now. And now we are still seeing a decrease in glaciers over time due to increased warming from climate change. So on the left, this shows Aufkoma, which is like mass balance of glaciers over time, and Vetrarkoma and Sumarafkoma. Vetrarkoma is the summer mass balance, and Sumarafkoma is Vetrarkoma is the winter mass balance, and Sumarafkoma is the summer balance. And then this green line, Ársafkoma, is the total change. So what's positive numbers is glaciers increasing, and negative numbers is glaciers decreasing. So overall, we're in the red. And so my research objectives for this project is using a multidisciplinary approach using paleomagnetism, field geology, and petrology. And so paleomagnetism is the study of the Earth's magnetic field in the past, and we're trying to use an age dating method to constrain eruption timing, and also field geology to catalog different eruption styles, and petrology to estimate eruption storage depths. And we're using Langjökull as a model for this relationship, which is Iceland's second largest glacier. But before we did that, we had to go into the field. So this is the field team we went out with in September. This is from right to left. That's Dr. Elisa Pisval. She was my supervisor for this project. Dr. Simon Matthews, he's a geochemist, and Dr. Rosalie Cole, she's a volcanologist, and my field assistant, Isabella, who came out with me in the field, could not have done this work without them. So. Oh, and also Dr. Alberto Coraccio, who could not be there, but he's also a geochemist who has really helped me understand a lot of equations with this project. And so we were kind of mapping out what we see in the field. So there's these usual volcanic craters like you would see on the Reykjanes Peninsula that are erupting now, like Skuflungur, but then you also get these volcanoes that have erupted into ice. So there's like a dynamic process going on here in Iceland. And also this is where we would use a drill to collect paleomagnetic samples and also geochemistry. Oh, and also we crossed many rivers throughout this project. And sometimes we would have to undress, and this was probably like the first time with coworkers to be in your underwear crossing a river. It's a very vulnerable experience. I've never done that before. But nonetheless, it's for science.
Sure.
But this is a map I created of Langjökull and the eruptions over the past 10,000 years and also older. This top left figure shows Iceland. in the context of the whole country and the relationship to the glaciers. And the yellow diamonds represent our field locations for September, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to sample the whole volcanic system. And so once we've collected our samples, we can start lab work. So that's me on the left at the Electron Microprobe lab at Háskóli Iceland. And I really want to thank Gudmundur, the lab manager, for helping me analyze to get the elemental content out of our volcanic glass and crystals and the rocks. And then also we did inductively coupled optical emission spectroscopy. This is heating up like particles of the rock, the lava rock, into a furnace. And so I want to thank Yoi, the lab manager, for helping me with that. And also I was able to have an intern work with me on this project, Emily Vernet from the Université de la Réunion. She was really helpful in the paleomagnetic lab work for this project. So I know this looks like a jail, but this is a magnetically shielded room that makes sure the Earth's magnetic field doesn't contaminate our samples. So yeah. So on to the results. These are the preliminary results from the elemental content I collected in the volcanic glass. So on the left is the depth where we think the magma is stored, and this black square is the error bars for the depth and the temperature of the lavas. And so how we calculate that is just a simple pressure equals rho GH equation. So density, gravity, and height. So we're trying to find this H here. So we can get the pressure out of a model where we input the elemental content and then we convert that into kilometers. But I know this looks like a bunch of dots on a screen, but I kind of envision it a different way, maybe from some scientists. So we can see the post-glacial lavas here starting to become shallower. So that's after a deglaciation, and the subglacial lavas kind of are constrained to the deep crust that are before deglaciation. And it kind of looks like a mouth here, and it's someone's like projectile vomiting these lavas after the deglaciation. You know, it's kind of ironic. It's almost like the warming Earth is causing the Earth to be sick, you know? So it's a really interesting relationship so far, but more scientifically, these are some of our preliminary interpretations and results. The post-glacial lavas are more variable, and they also are cover the most surface area for the lavas. So this may imply an increase in magma quantity following a deglaciation, releasing this pressure from the crust by the weight of the glacier. And then onto the paleomagnetism. The Earth has a magnetic field. We know this because you have seen all the northern lights here in Iceland. The Earth has a liquid iron core, so it generates a magnetic memory in the rocks over time. And we also know the magnetic field is always changing. So you can get an accurate age date over around the past 10,000 years with low error, which is really useful for Iceland because it's been lacking in accurate age dates using traditional methods of like isotopes, because Icelandic basalts are very low in potassium, so it's really hard to date them. And so once we input them into a model, using the magnetic data collected from the rocks, we can get a result like this. Then this is from Krakastræn one of our sample locations. And so on the left, it shows the declination and inclination collected from the rock, and it shows up our samples as the green line, and the red line is all collected data from other places. And so we're using this global model to estimate an age from this. And so for this one, it's around 10,000 years old. But once we do that for all of them, we can kind of create an eruption timeline for these lavas in conjunction with the glacial period. So once we have this ice sheet decline here around 11,000 years ago, we may have some lava still in the deep crust, but as the times moves on and we start to become more ice free, they start to become shallower. So it's like these interesting relationships, and maybe even a timeline of eruptions. Like it may there's this really debate in the research of how magma is transferred throughout the crust. So those are the preliminary results for the work. But onto cultural activities, I also really got to enjoy life in Iceland. So first, I want to start off with a new hobby alert. Maybe Belinda mentioned it, but I've created two hats and a sweater while here. Wow. And awesome. Yeah, it looks really beautiful throughout my time here. This was me unraveling in the lab the sweater and having to redo a lot of stitches. And I also joined a knitting club here at Háskóli Íslands, which is really great to find community and friends.
Are there Icelanders, lots of them there?
Yeah, yes. And this was me accidentally making an infinite loop on the hat instead of a closed loop. It's a really fun activity. Oh, and also, if you've ever heard of knitting, there's also unknitting events here in Iceland. So I went with Emma and Sadie, which was a really great experience, and meeting new people there in Iceland as well. It's a really cool device to just unknit a sweater and you can start all over. And then also receiving critiques from the knitting group under Holtkamp. This is Bauja critiquing my sweater. She currently has one of my projects held hostage. I will see her Saturday and get it from her. It's been a really great community. And then next, I've also previously, before Fulbright, I was helping teach second grade at a Waldorf school in Milwaukee, and Tamarack Waldorf School. And if you don't know what a Waldorf school is, it's like an independent school system that focuses on creativity, independence, and emotional wellness. So, for example, kids don't use technology in the school, and there's also a knitting class dedicated for them. So I thought it would be nice to write letters to the kids I worked with on my time in Iceland. So I would write a short summary of what I did every month, teaching them Icelandic or showing them what I've seen, like puffins and my loving Vesturbæjarlaugi swimming in the pool. And then they would send pictures back to me, and it would just be like feel at home here, having that long distance relationship. I think that's a puffin there. But you don't know what you're going to get with these kids. So I got this letter: Dear Grandma, having a good time in heaven. I miss you or something. So I think they get the memo of yeah. Yeah. I know what you're gonna get. But I've also had friends visit me here while in Iceland. This is my friend Ocean, who visited me and got to go to Thingvellir. She's a soil scientist by training, but now doing some marine biology work. So maybe she really wants to work with the whales here, and I hope she does. And also my friends Zizi and Posey got to go travel to the south of Iceland and explore the Glacier Lagoon. I really love the landscape here. It's just so moving and calming to be around. And then also making new friends here as well in Iceland, and having dinners like from Switzerland, Italy, France, Germany, and making a lot of new connections. So it's always nice. And then also my family was able to visit. On the left is my mom and dad, who I think are on the call right now, and my sister, Emma, and also my partner, Ethan, got to visit me in August. And this was probably one of my favorite memories is swimming in Foss near Akureyri, these natural geothermal pool waterfalls, an amazing time. So. Also, the Northern Lights have gotten me starstruck, so I got to see red Northern Lights. This was during field work. This was even in Reykjavik. You can see them here, which is always mind-blowing to me. In a major city, you can still see them, but this was really amazing. My friend Ocean got to see these ones, so really great for her to experience that. And then I've also got to enjoy queer life in Iceland, of course. I've got to go to drag shows at Kiki, and also the new Dyke Night led by DJ Linda Anderson. Really good techno house music going on at Bar 22. And also I joined a run club, queer run club here called Hopa Styrmis. And that's Vera and Hannes, my Icelandic run group. I've also got to enjoy events at Samtökin Alta, which is the Icelandic queer organization here, going to trans femme meetings, polyamorous meetings, and also experimental dance workshops. There are so many events that go on there to support the queer community here. And also going out with friends. This is at a goth night with my friend Hansku. She's my roommate from Finland who plays flute, and my friend Trau, my Icelandic friend Trau. Going out with her has been really great to experience queer life in Iceland. And lastly, I want to highlight the art, film, and music here. This was an exhibition at Listasatan recently called Lava Forming, and I thought it was a really interesting for my research here. It is an exhibit talking about how Iceland envisions a future in 2150 using lava as a natural resource. And so there was like this really cool exhibit with like a simulated documentary of what life in Iceland would be like with lava. And I really liked this concept that come up as like a future memory. You know, we have memories about the past, but what about memories of the future? What can Iceland look like in the face of climate change? So it really like put into like a physical form what that looked like and how geologists maybe can be a part of that. And I really liked this documentary, O Goda Gamla Grindavik, on the Reykjanes Peninsula, creating a documentary of the experience and displacement of people from their homes and from the start of eruptions in 2021. It was really interesting. And also, I was lucky enough to come early in Iceland to attend Reykjavik Pride, and that was really amazing. There's such good music here. Like, I love it. But these are my references, and takk fyrir spurningar.
Both the sort of more scientific part was so interesting, but then you really brought in your whole experience.
Yes.
So that was nice. Do we have any questions? Yes.
So with the geomagnetism, it changes over time, but is it set in the rocks like when they form, like when the magma cools and becomes a rock, is the magnetic characteristics like frozen in the rock?
Yes, it's similar to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it works almost like a tree ring kind
Yes, yes. Each
Okay.
has its own magnetic memory. They call it because the Earth magnetic field is always changing, so you can get different measurements over time. Yeah.
So what's up next for you?
Well, I've decided to go back to the US and pursue an industry job in geology. So I'm looking forward to that, being closer to home and also bringing my Iceland experience with me.
Where are you gonna be? Where in the US? What area?
Chicago area.
Chicago
Yes.
area.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll be coming back and visiting us.
Yes, I would love to.
Were there?
We have a question online,
Okay.
also from Henry Stevens. Yes, if you mind talking more about the low level of potassium in Iceland rock and why that matters.
Yes, so I'm not sure why potassium is so low. It's just been a common theme in Iceland where you get these chemical differences throughout the volcanic island, and that's probably due to it being over a spreading center and mantle plume. You get like these variety of different rock types. And so when you're trying to use isotopic dating method like argon, you need enough potassium to release and date the rock to see how much it's changed over time. So that's been very low. And when you have it very low, it gives you a lot of error in the age dates. And I've collaborated with geologists at Náttúrufræðistofnun, the Natural Science Institute of Iceland, and they've done a lot of work on argon dates on Longjökull area. And sometimes you get dates that are maybe this rock is 150,000 years old, but the error is like 250,000 years old. So it's like projecting into the future. It doesn't really make any sense. And when you kind of correlate that with the low potassium, that's where you get the high errors. So, yeah.
Oh,
We have another online question.
Okay.
If we have time.
yeah, we do have time.
This is from Aaron Kennedy, who was a Fulbright scholar the year before. And he has along the lines of impacts is the
Volcanological?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
community working with tourism organization about increased risk of subglacial eruptions.
I don't know if the tourism industry is working a lot with the volcanic eruption, but I know Veðurstofa Íslands, the Icelandic Meteorological Office, always puts updates on their website of volcanic hazards and stuff. But I really think we need to keep an eye on the less active areas in Iceland, because once you're focusing more on Reykjanes, you kind of lose thought of what's going on in the other volcanic systems. And, Goldfoss is like a major tourist attraction near Longjökull, and Skalpalnes is like a major glacier hike on Longjökull, so it should be continuously monitored.
So there was a student at Iceland University that is looking at Vít specifically because it's near Kafla and the Jökulhops and
Yeah.
it's prone to those if Kafla kicks off. And because it has one of the highest percentages of immigrant residents in addition to its tourism large numbers of tourists, she did a study looking at exactly that, like how aware are people of the threat, how much work is being done to provide information for the non-Icelandic speaking population that's there, plus the visitors, in how to respond and that. So that was her master's thesis, and so people are thinking about it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, no more online? No? Okay, great, thank you. Sure, I give you the right one. Yes, and your Fulbright Iceland pin
Yes.
and your little
Yep.
memorandum.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got one more before we take a little break. So we have another Fulbright-NSF Arctic Fellow, Isabella. Came here as a PhD candidate in applied mathematics and statistics at the Colorado School of Mines. She's affiliated with the University of Iceland's Hornafjörður Research Center. And her project involves assessing climate-related hazards in the southeast of Iceland, using geospatial analysis and machine learning. So I know that she's also been volunteering and taking part in various cultural activities. So we'd love to hear about your Fulbright year, Isabella.
Thanks, Linda. So my project is titled Geospatial Risk Analysis to strengthen climate resilience in Hornafjörður. By the way, okay, some background. So who am I? I am an American immigrant from India, and this picture there is me in India, actually, before we moved to New York City. And then the second picture is me doing field work on Solheimur. And sometimes I just think about where I came from and how I'm here. And it's just incredible. And I don't believe it sometimes. But now my career has led me to do a PhD in Colorado School of Mines. And I am now finishing my third chapter, I guess, which is the Icelandic project. My whole PhD is related to climate resilience and risk analysis using spatial modeling. So I was able to write the Icelandic grant to form it so I can use it for my third chapter of my thesis and hopefully publish by the end of this year. Now, when I met my advisor here for Iceland, Thordy, he came to me with this project called Action C10, which is a climate resilience project for rural development in Iceland. This project involves 5 different municipalities, and one of them is Hornafjörður, which is the largest one in this image. But we know that this region is heavily glaciated with Vatnajökull ice cap right in between it, I guess, and it's got about 2,500 inhabitants. We also know that Hub, the main city there, is heavily reliant on tourism and access to the road system, so tourists are safe and can make it through there, so nothing is so they're not endangered. Now, some of the risks at hand. These show just 3 of the 5 that we have all around Iceland. The first one is rockfall and landslides. The second, we can see some snow avalanches being plowed. And the third down here is some flooding based on heavy precipitation or river. The 2 that aren't depicted in this image is wind and sandstorms, as well as potholes and things that could actually cause major problems to the road. Now, the data. We have first the Copernicus Arctic Regional Reanalysis data, which spans all of Greenland and Iceland and northern Arctic. And for that, we have a spatial resolution of 2.5 kilometers per grid size. So they're just little cubes all on these spaces, including the ocean as well. And we have temporal resolution of 3 hours. This data spans from 1995 till 2025. And we ended up just clipping it for the Hornafjörður region, which is this little square box right there. The second is the incident report, which, as we know, with data collection takes a very long time. And so I was working with Kevin with collecting this data. And I actually only received it maybe 2 months ago and trying to collect and get the different incident reports together from history and from farmers, as well as actual documented road incidents. These data spans from all around the ring road and from 2014 to 2025. There are 17 different types of hazards that were documented in these areas, and then we kind of grouped it into 5 main hazards. Now, this is just a depiction of the data of all of the ring road. So we see the yearly distribution of the hazards. We have grouped it in the 5 groups with flooding, road surface conditions, rockfall, landslides, snow avalanches, and wind speeds, and visibilities. So it is a bit misleading here where you see that there is an increase to hazard as the years progress, but we also have to make sure that documentation has not been really used much in the years prior. Really, it started in 2020. So the previous ones were actually documented by all the farmers and such that we kind of had to translate and put into an Excel file. But you can see that there are some hazards that are a little bit more prominent, such as the wind visibility, as well as the road surfaces. and flooding third. Next, if I overlaid all of this data into one map of Iceland, it would not be readable. So I did it in categories. So you can see where some of these hazards are along the ring road. And you can flooding, road service conditions, and wind visibility are kind of prominent all around the ring road. Whereas rockfall and landslides, as well as avalanches, are more in the West Fjords and East Fjords area. Next is the persistence of these hazards. What's nice about this data set is that we also have the timeline of when the hazard occurred to when it was fixed or remedied. So rock surfaces, road surfaces, and conditions do seem to be more persistent over the years because it just takes a long time to fix infrastructure, whereas snow avalanches and such can be mitigated within 6 hours. This helps us to understand and hopefully use later in analysis. Now, we clipped all of this to Hornafjörður just to make it easier for analysis. And for some reason, none of the snow avalanches were documented. So that's the only hazard not in this region that we have currently, but we're still trying to fix and add more documentation for the hazard groups. But it helps just to see where the different hazards are located along the roadside. Now, because all the data was from start to end, it doesn't actually show how long these hazards are persistent. So I was able to extrapolate that based on days and hours. And you can see that, again, we have to make sure we have that in mind from really 2020 before. None of the hazards were as regularly documented compared to after. But you do see an increase in 2023 for certain hazards, and especially in March and the timeline of each month. Now, what's next is that I did get the Vegageddon Road Administration grant, which gives me a year of funding to continue this work. So I was able to do preliminary analysis and data collection with Fulbright and hopefully do my final spatial analysis with this grant. And speaking with my advisors and all, we're hoping to do a regression climate model, adding some spatial dependence, possibly with this Gaussian process, which is just using like things around like things, will perhaps lead a probability of them happening again in that same area. And then adding a temporal dependence, which is new to me, doing these two things together, because we have a timeline for each hazard and when they occur. Hopefully, when that is all over, I have a full spatial temporal model to map and predict these different hazards along this region, and then maybe extend it to all of Iceland and the Ring Road. I did have some fun during my Fulbright here. I was able to go on a field work on many different occasions. On the left, on your left, I got to do some ice coring sampling with one of my friends back here. And we were able to try to do density measurements and try to understand the mass balance on Mantle. We were there we left at 4:30. I think I woke up at 4:30 that day. Got there at 6:30 and did not get home until 12 midnight. So it was a very long day of field work, but it was with great people and good company. It was beautiful. And then I got to go down to Hub and also check out some of the glaciers there, meet the community members, get some of that documentation I was telling you about, as well as help Cameron on their field work on land Google doing magnetic field dating. And then I also was able to help another friend in Solhelmingökul doing some drilling, also for mass balance measurements. So I think it's been really nice to be able to live here and just say yes to any opportunity that comes my way. Next, I got to do a lot of activities here, probably too many for my ability, but I was able to manage it. And one of them, I got into a cool activity called acrobatic yoga. One of my friends is back there actually doing this with me. We recently went out kind of by Keflavik and did some acro yoga, and it was super fun. I met a lot of. Do you ever fish it?
I know, I'm just amazed.
I know, I'm also amazed. I had no ability to do this before I came. And again, just seeing us opportunities that come my way has been really fruitful. And then I also got into the dance community up there with me and my friend. We had the end of the year party recently, just a week ago. And this was us. I got into too many dances. This was Lindy Hop, I think.
That's a hard one.
It's fun. It's very fun. Lindy Hop, and I started taking West Coast swing classes. Zouk, and also a little bit for country swing. So I've been dancing a lot, and that was a really great way to meet locals and make friends. I also got an opportunity to go snowboarding in Akureyri for like a week. Also good weather. I miss snowboarding, so it's just super nice. Now, if you know me, this side here is half of my luggage. I've had to move 6 times since I've arrived here. I've been very unfortunate with housing, but in some ways I was able to experience different neighborhoods and meet new people and rely on the community heavily. That has been really nice to know that I have people to rely on, even though I'm a foreigner and I've just kind of arrived. I've also made so many good friends. So I was able to host a Thanksgiving and Christmas party at a really cool place I was living at in Kvidar, as well as experience the New Year's lights and fireworks. And then this is some of the Acro community, as well as this new community that we just finished our first intro class. But yes, any questions?
Amazing, yes.
So you said Iceland is chapter 3. What are the other, like, are
Sorry.
there other study areas besides Iceland? You said Iceland was chapter 3 of your,
Yes.
Dissertation, so what are the
So
other-
my first 2 chapters are in Colorado.
okay.
And so we have different hazards in the Colorado system that I was spatially mapping and hoping to use the similar framework and expand it. But right now I've never done both the temporal and spatial resolution together. So it's kind of been a challenging, exciting project to work on for Iceland.
And I'm assuming that once you see whether that works here with the Icelandic data, you'll then revisit the data from Colorado and
I can expand it more and
Yeah.
we can give it to our partners there, and it'll be a fully functional model that they can use to help mitigate hazards for people's safety.
great.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline yet on when you think you're gonna be defending your
Yeah,
dissertation?
May 2027.
You'll have to let us know.
I will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, was there something?
Something popped up from Aaron.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Eagle eye.
Well, it's not a question.
Oh, okay.
It's some information I can.
Like you can pass on, okay,
Yeah.
great, yeah, he was here last year doing avalanche work, so I'm sure he was very interested in this.
Cool.
So then, thank you so much. Oh, you had a question, yes?
Do any like geospatial risk analysis with Vega given, like with volcanoes, or it just seemed like it's only avalanche and wind and stuff?
There are people there doing it. Right now, I'm trying to minimize the size of my data. It is already a bit difficult working with it, but if I can get this working, we can maybe combine the 2 different modeling setups and groups together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Isabella. It's fabulous. Here's your
Thank you.
Fulbright Iceland certificate, your little Iceland memento, and your Fulbright Iceland pin.
Thank you.
So that concludes the first half of our program today, and I think we should just give everybody who's already presented a big round of applause. It's been just such a great first half of our day. I mean, I'm always so inspired by these people. It's just amazing what they're doing. But now we're going to take, I think, a well-deserved coffee break. We're going to start again promptly at 3. So please be back in time. And those of you who are with us virtually, I hope you will be back with us as well, and that you will have a nice coffee break, even though you won't have Icelandic kleinu probably. Okay, so welcome to our second session of today's Fulbright Forum, or welcome back if you were with us earlier this afternoon. In the first part of the program, we heard from 5 of our Fulbright Fellows, and now we're going to turn to the Fulbright Scholars. The first speaker in the second session of the day is our second recipient of a Distinguished Award in Teaching Research. Anne is a teacher at Frederick Carter Elementary School in Corning, New York, and is hosted by the University of Akureyri. Her project focuses on inclusive education in Iceland with a focus on elementary and rural schools. We here really at Fulbright Iceland believe strongly that providing opportunities to teachers is one of the most impactful grants that we have. In terms of our goals of increasing mutual understanding, we find that what teachers bring back with them to the United States, to their students, is very, very important. So let's all welcome Anne.
Thank you very much. My name is Ann Walters. As she said, I'm a third grade teacher from Corning, New York. Corning is a town of about 10,000 people in Western New York State. We're about 4 hours from New York City, and we are definitely rural. I am a general education teacher and I also have a consultant classroom, which means students with learning needs are placed in my classroom, and I co-teach with a special education teacher to provide what they need in order to be successful in our classroom. Typically, I also get the English as a new language students, new language, not second language. And unfortunately, there are none in third grade this year, but there are up-and-coming students in the school. So how I got here. Last year, we had a little sweetie in my classroom whose needs we just could not meet. And so she had to change schools, and it made me wonder what else I could have done to help them to be successful. And so that was inspiration to do some research on inclusion and learn that Iceland is very good at it and has a lot to teach, which is why I am here specifically in Akureyri, which is a smaller community where I can research inclusion and bring some things back. So many things. I'm so excited to share with you. And in this picture, I am here with my children. This is Sam and Tamako outside their school. They're going to Naustaskóli in Akureyri. So I'm having my own private research with them as I am here. Icelandic as a new language for them, and they've been amazing as we've done this. How do I go? Now you can tell I'm another teacher. Don't know how to do it. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So first, in my time here, I have seen a lot of the same problems that teachers are facing here that they face in my home community. Things that have been brought up, increased ADHD, autism, in the lens that teachers are uncertain how to meet the needs of these students. Either under or over family involvement, increased teacher demands, mental health and behavior concerns among students. That age-old question for teachers, am I doing enough for everybody? Too much screen time for kids, we see the effects of that at school. And kind of teacher well-being, it is a very stressful time to be a teacher. It is the best job, but it is absolutely very, very stressful. On a positive note, I have seen incredible teacher passion. Teachers here love their students, they love their jobs. Administrators here love their teachers, and they love their students as well. When you walk down the hallways here in Iceland or in my town, everyone knows each other's names. They say hello, they say good morning. And so that's been lovely to see, and I've really enjoyed that. If you ever feel sad about the state of the world, you should go to a school and watch teachers teach and students learn, and vice versa. This morning, I had the joy of going to Kletaskóli here in Reykjavik, and it was great. If you would like to know, the number of the day is FIM, and it was the best 2 hours. Besides these hours, I've spent a few. It was a very joyful 2 hours watching these first graders learn the number 5. As I've been doing my research, I've really been looking for practical things that I can take back to my colleagues. If I have any colleagues watching from home, we all know that inclusion is important. We're all working really hard at it. We're all doing the things we know. So my goal of coming here was to get a new perspective, see what other teachers are doing, look for the things we hadn't thought of, or things we can apply differently. So in my time here, I've visited 10 schools, done multiple interviews at the university, Institute of School Development, with parents, teachers, school assistants, participated in 2 different conferences. And it's been great. I want to show you next the things I thought I would be studying. This is where I started. So what I didn't realize when I first got here was that I was approaching inclusion with a more narrow definition of what it means. Somewhere in my brain, I always kind of thought of it as a need, as something that wasn't there, a learning need, a disability. You don't speak the language. Something's just not there. But it did not take long in Iceland to see that I needed to broaden my definition of what inclusion is. So although all the schools and interviews were unique, there were common themes that kept coming up as I was talking to the people and observing and seeing it. And these are the 8 themes that I've come up with that I'd like to bring home with me, and I want to share with you what I've learned about. If I can get this next. So first and maybe most important is the thought that here, inclusion has a much more holistic perspective. Yes, it does include students with learning disabilities and language learners, but also those who are gifted, learners who are at risk from a low socioeconomic background, or even those that are chronically ill. Things like that broadens the definition of inclusion. First of all, making it bigger, but yet more manageable because everybody needs something. It's not just for one, it's for all. I had a conversation with a principal who said at her school, we don't call it special education, we call it supporting education. We don't call it a special teacher, we call it a supporting teacher. Everyone needs support. And that by definition makes it more inclusive. In this picture of the girl with the headphones on, this teacher was using this technology to dictate either sentences or words. So for her Icelandic learners, or maybe kids with disabilities, they were getting words that they were listening to and trying to spell. And then for more advanced learners were getting sentences. Something that simple is inclusion. And I got to participate. I got the words, the sentences based on my level of Icelandic. But it was really fun and I enjoyed doing it. I sat right next to her while she was doing her sentences and we were both learning together. And that was very, very well, sorry. My second theme is teamwork. I've been completely amazed at the teamwork that I've seen in classrooms. Teachers collaborating, working at teams at a grade level, within a classroom, across grade levels, with special teachers. The amount of small group rotations, team teaching that I've seen is just amazing. And I think anybody that works in this education system in Iceland should be very proud of that. This means kids can work at a level and pace that's appropriate for them. Teachers can meet student needs. I took a picture of this small group rotation just so I could show it to my friends at home. And just the amount of planning that went into making the groups and picking the right tasks, and every day is a different day. The way that it worked was very seamless, but I know how much work went into that. But now all students can have all of their needs met. Their teachers are being creative and they're sharing. Then in this picture, this collaborative project also very cool. So the woodworking teacher did the frame in the woodworking class, and then the handicraft teacher did the weaving, and together they've created this beautiful project. That's even more than maybe they would have done on their own, which is very cool. And with this, when my children started at school, I was amazed at the team that was available to help them. I kind of coordinator of foreign students who help them make a schedule and get adjusted. Icelandic as a second language, teachers to help them learn a little bit of Icelandic, friends to check on them. So just the team atmosphere is absolutely amazing. Then another thing that I've seen in all the schools I visited is more opportunities to play and create than I typically see at home. Classes like cooking, woodworking, and sewing, we do offer those, but they typically start much later than they do here in Iceland. But so many benefits and so many positive parts of inclusion. Think about all the fine motor, gross motor skills, the focus that it takes to do knitting. We heard about knitting earlier. You have to focus to be able to do it. The life skills that come with washing dishes and responsibility on being part of a team or part of a group. My children love this. I'm sorry that they won't have this until they get to middle school when they get back home. Because I didn't have as much experience with these classes, I specifically asked the teachers of these classes if they had to do a lot of modifying to make sure kids with learning needs were able to participate. And they said, no. Sometimes we need a picture, like a recipe might have to have pictures instead of words. But typically no. And I thought that was really interesting. If we're worried about including kids, maybe there's a place where different kids are going to succeed than maybe other kids. This also helps to tap into different modalities and the different ways that kids learn, which is go outside. As probably everyone in this room knows, kids in Iceland go outside 2 to 3 times a day, no matter the weather. And think about all the amazing skills they're practicing. All the time it takes to put those warm clothes and shoes on and off, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, personal responsibility, even body awareness, right? It's cold, I need a hat. Kids definitely need to be taught stuff like that. I had a fun conversation with a principal who told me that a foreign visitor, not me, said to her once, well, this kid doesn't have a hat, they can't go outside. And she said, well, I bet you someone at home said, put your hat on. Then I bet the teacher said, put your hat on, and the child didn't put the hat on. But that's the last time they're going to forget their hat in Iceland. Like, I love that. Like, give kids a chance to learn with these sort of natural consequences. The middle picture is my son on his outside day. He really thought this was a great use of a school day. They went on a hike and then they roasted marshmallows. That was what he took away. But I know that there was a lot of other things that happened during that time. And that was great. Really, really great. Once they are outside, think about all the gross motor skills they're using when they're playing. And it also builds in and normalizes breaks for some of our more neurodivergent learners. Like, breaks are part of it. And breaks are beneficial for everybody. And there's a lot of skills that are developed when there are no adults around. Social skills, language, problem solving. For those of us that speak Icelandic and those that don't, you need to practice those skills and be able to use them. And then there's the shoes off. I included that photo a lot for my colleagues at home to see what that really looks like. But I was thinking about the chronically ill students. How much cleaner is it in the schools in Iceland because we're not wearing our shoes inside? And there's a way to be more inclusive there. All right, something else I've seen all over Iceland is flexibility about timing and with students. So the picture that says Becker 1 through 5 is the smallest school I visited in Riese. They have 19 students. It's an island, not too far from Akureyri. And so those kids just have to be flexible because we have first graders up through fifth graders all in the same class together. Students get what they need, but they also have to wait. They have to do what the teacher asks them to do. And then when it's their turn again, they get another turn. The middle picture is Skóli, which is famous in Akureyri because there are not as many walls. So they can use the spaces very flexibly. You can hear what's happening throughout the school, and they use the different spaces for different activities. And then another thing I noticed again across the schools where students were very clear on what was to be done next. So this child is working on a woodworking project. I believe it's their foot. They're tracing their foot, and then they had to cut it and sand it and paint it. And there was a lot. Oh, I think they're making a shoe tying place to practice shoe tying. So every child knew what the next step was. So you weren't waiting. But then once the project or the assignment was done, every kid knew what they were supposed to do next as an extension. Which again is inclusion. So if you are done, here's the next thing you can do. Not to wait, but to keep learning. And I think that was something very positive I saw. Also a lot less pressure on the number of tasks to finish and keeping track of the tasks that kids have finished. So we just had a coffee break here. Hopefully wherever you are, you've also had a coffee break. Places for people to stop and take a break, especially in schools, are amazing in Iceland. I did not see a teacher staff area that wasn't inviting and warm and had a coffee pot that was full, and teachers used them. They stopped their work, they went, and that space invites people to come and talk and collaborate to support students, and that is super important. It's very easy to get siloed into what you're doing in your own space, but to have this space to come together is important. In some of the smaller schools, like the one that says teacher work area, they use their staff wisely by having 3 teachers for two grade levels. So the 3rd and the 4th grade teachers work together to provide instruction for those 2 levels, but they didn't have their computers in their classroom. They had them in this teacher work area. So they had to come together to collaborate and that. And then finally, there was always a place somewhere in the school for whole school connection. So this is one of the smaller schools. They start their day every day with a whole school meeting, which I didn't see everywhere, but this school was smaller, so they could do that. But there was always a place where kids could come together for a speaker or an assembly or to put on a play or a performance. So all of those places to connect are very important. Then spaces to learn. It is amazing how creative the schools in Iceland are using the spaces that are available. I really liked that one, the writing on the window. Again, if anyone's listening at home, are we allowed to do that? Because I love it. There were private spaces, like these offices, for kids that needed a break or needed a private place to work. There were more public spaces. The hallways had couches and chairs and tables, and this is across the board. This is 10 very different schools that I saw this. There were places with tables. There were places like this with the cozy corner, so that students could be flexible and work in a way that would work for them and be more interesting. And then finally, community. And this is where I say my definition of inclusion changed after about 2 hours in Iceland, because inclusion does not work without the supportive community. And I think this is one of the most inclusive societies I've certainly ever lived in. The resources available to the schools through the community are great. And I think that's an important part of it. Like, for example, my kid, all students in Iceland take swimming lessons, right? But they use the community pool. Even we were walking over here from our lunch, there were kids getting off the public bus because we use the public bus to get them where they need to go. In Risey, that island I was talking about, this is the public library and the school library, which is maybe a little unusual, except in very small towns. The libraries here have so many offerings, in addition to books, games, resources, tools, community groups, the Icelandic language practice, which I try to go to, run by volunteers. So if it's important, the community also needs to have buy-in and something else that we're just starting to discover, playgrounds, parks, and trails. Now that the snow is melting, we've started to look at some of those, and those are also. So what can I do with all of this? All right, so here are my thoughts. So what can I bring? So first of all, share my thoughts on inclusive inclusion. Maybe my colleagues already think like this, but let's have a conversation about it. The teamwork. I have an amazing team. We have an amazing school team, but there's other people out there that I haven't reached out to. Other specialists. What else can we do? I work for a pretty decent sized school district. There's other 3rd grades. There's other school districts not nearby. Again, if you're listening at home, watch out. I might want to collaborate. I hope you're ready. Projects, same there. What other projects can we add? How can we easily take a project that can be extended for somebody that is done, that needs a little bit more? And thinking more, not just within 3rd grade in my school, but past that to other schools, to other districts, like that. The outside barriers, I would say warm clothes, weather, but what can I do? Like how bad is it if we get soaking wet in the rain? Things like that. I think we can add more outside time. Where can I give students more flexibility? connecting with colleagues, and using my spaces. I have a great classroom and I have a lot of fun alternative seating. I think there's other ways I can restructure the space in there to make more inclusive groups. Yeah, and I'm very excited about all these questions. I have a few more weeks here in Iceland to visit a few more schools and kind of get some thoughts together. But I think it's going to be great. And so here are some pictures of me and my kids exploring Iceland. Thank you, Fulbright and Essex. Thank you, University of Akureyri, especially Becca, for all your help with everything in Iceland. Thank you for my school district and my school, my colleagues and administrators. A lot of people have worked very hard to make it so I can be here, and I appreciate it. And finally, my parents, who've helped me out a lot here, my husband, Chris, and my lovely children for coming on this adventure with me. Do you have any?
Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. Aiden, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And I like how you talk about how inclusiveness became redefined for you.
Yes.
Because instead of looking at specific situations and kind of trying to fill them in, you're looking at people's individual personalities and trying to sort of reach out and change with them. So it's inherently more positive.
Absolutely.
Kind of with what's happening in the US right now, though, there being more charter schools and other types of schools, it seems to me that if this individualistic approach is implemented at a charter school, then you're inherently creating a class difference, whereas it can't be seen in public schools. So what would you do to sort of, try to bring this out and give people more equal opportunities like they have in Iceland?
So I think that the problem with talking about America is just that it is so big, and I have felt, maybe as others in this room, like bogged down with the enormity of some of these problems. So I think one thing I've thought a lot about is where I can change. So first of all, in my classroom, like I think there's some physical modifications I can make very quickly to do this. The thinking about inclusion, including gifted, like I think there's some big things I can do, even just restructuring a unit where it's like maybe there's A through B steps and you get to C and you get to E, like things like that. Now what I can do outside of like my little bubble, I'm not sure there's a lot, but once I've done this, well, I'll tell my friends about it in third grade, and then I'll tell my third grade network because I have a network of third grade teachers from the region, and maybe they'll tell their friends. And I really think that's the only way we get anywhere with any of this. It's funny, we have in my community a couple private and charter schools, but we really do have great public schools. So maybe like, how else do we advertise that? I mean, I just said Corning, New York, to a field of who knows how many people are watching this. So like all of this matters, and all of this would build.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes,
I have a question, but first, again, thank you to follow up on that. Yes, you can work with what's in your space. Do you have plans to be maybe talking to administrators or seeing about asking for changes at a higher order level?
Yeah. They might be on listening to this.
True.
I sent this to all of them. I hope they are. Yeah. Why not? I mean, that was part of the thanking them. They knew where I was going. They knew what I was studying. So yes, I think the next big step will be to really think through what this would look like in Iceland, or taking what I've seen in Iceland and thinking about what it looks like. So one thing I was thinking of, so if we have a social studies unit and it's got 5 big lessons in it, so like, is there a way that we can divide that up where me and then my other teachers, we each have a lesson? Or do we take it and we each make a version of the lesson for like kind of different levels of kids? I don't know which one makes the most sense, but like, I think that's the next step of conversation with the people at home. The outside, the no shoes. I have a hard time imagining America with no shoes, but maybe we could get inside shoes. That's my ask. I'm gonna ask, but why not? It doesn't hurt to ask. So that was the thought I already had. The more outside time, that's always but we also have to do in my grade level a movement break, which we actually did outside. So they do have a second 10-minute recess, but maybe I can talk to my colleagues and get a 15-minute recess, and we can, we started doing it and then other grade levels started. So I think creating that space to talk to each other is probably the most important thing. Like getting together and just be like, what are you doing? Because teachers are overwhelmed. Everyone, that's probably true.
Yeah, I imagine that, I mean, you have learned a lot, but I imagine that your Icelandic colleagues have also been able to learn something from you. Just being here, are there things that you've seen here that you, would say, that where they could learn something from what you're doing? Is there anything in particular that you've noticed that they've been interested in, or?
So one thing that definitely comes up in most schools is, and this is a good thing, but Iceland teachers and students have definitely a much more maybe casual relationship with each other than maybe I would be used to in the US. At least in elementary school, you call your teacher by their first name. We just don't do that. And so we've talked a lot about rigor and how difficult the school day is. I do think there's probably a happy meeting place in between our two countries. Maybe we need to let some things go, but maybe there's also space for a little more harder work
Discipline.
Yeah, something, but that's definitely come up. Both in schools and then at the university with their teaching faculty as well.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a happy place in there for
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's the great thing about this. Not only are you coming and learning, but you're also bringing things to Iceland, right? So perspectives. Yeah. Yeah, because neither is perfect and both can.
Here's another thing. I'm so impressed with the number of school aides that they have in the classrooms, teaching assistants, staffing, and they're like, well, we need more help. Well, I believe you. I believe you need more help, but there's a lot of staff here, and this is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two things to be true, I guess.
If there aren't any more questions, then I just want to say thank you so much. So here's your certificate. And your Fulbright pin. Again, this program, it's been such a joy to take part in this program. For the last this is only our second year, but we think it's one of the most impactful programs that Fulbright has. So thank you. We also here at Fulbright Iceland have something that's called the Request for Scholar program, where Icelandic university departments apply to have a Fulbright scholar in a specific field to teach and work with them for a semester. And this allows Icelandic universities to think strategically about where they want to enhance competencies and cooperation. And our next speaker is a result of that grant. So the Agricultural University of Iceland applied to the Commission for a Scholar in Rural Planning. And after reviewing the applicants, Chris Holtkamp, who is at the University of Wisconsin Falls River in Conservation and Environmental Planning, he was selected for the award. Chris has spent the semester at the Agricultural University teaching and collaborating, and we can't wait to hear all about that. So the floor is yours.
So, listening to your presentation, it's a lot of what we talk about in planning, the idea of inclusivity and the idea of creating spaces where people can come together and build community. That's what urban planning really aspires to be, is creating the physical environments that we can build community and create relationships and networks. And so my project was to, which button is it? Sorry. No. It was the albums. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So yeah, that's me. So I was working at the Agricultural University, and why this is important in Iceland particularly is because so much of the country is rural. When we look at the history of Iceland, I read this really fat book called 1100 Years in Iceland. If you ever want just a really broad history of the country, that's a good one to read. But what struck me as I was reading that book was in the first several hundred years of settlement in Iceland, there was a very strong cultural and social pressure to be a farmer. That's what people did here. And so instead of having, people come here and settle in community, people came here and settled in farms, isolated farms. And so it was almost, when I was reading through that, I thought about the pioneers moving west and, across the Great Plains, you saw a lot of that same thing where people would get their 160 acres and build their home on it, and that's where they lived. Similar patterns here, where it was isolated farms, and the only real, you couldn't even really call them villages, were at the farms of the bishops of Iceland. Once it converted to Christianity, you started to see some larger settlements created around those areas, around the bishop's seat where their church was. And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so that dispersed settlement pattern was how Iceland developed for much of its history. And so urbanization didn't really start in Iceland until the late 1700s and the 1800s. And then real urban growth didn't start really until after World War II. And that's when we started to see Reykjavik become 200,000 people in a big urban space. And so with this small dispersed population, the capacity to solve problems isn't the same as what you would have in Reykjavik or even Akureyri, where you have almost 20,000 people. You have a much bigger resource pool to draw from. So in these dispersed regional spaces, these smaller municipalities around the country, there is a need to think regionally, to think at a larger scale than we typically do, because the capacity isn't there, and to necessarily solve something just as one municipality of 500, 750 people trying to solve a problem. There's also a lot of our problems cross jurisdictional boundaries. So when we're thinking about transportation networks, the road doesn't stop at the municipality line, right? That road continues. So if one municipality does something and it just stops right at that border, that sort of artificial political border of the municipality, what's that going to mean for the adjoining region, municipality? And so, those kinds of issues need broader thinking than we typically bring. And so this idea of a regional planning for rural areas starts to address those problems that aren't just bounded by a single municipality. And we need to recognize that because Iceland has this magnet of Reykjavik, this huge draw that's pulling people from these rural communities, and the jobs are being created in Reykjavik, there's social activities, there's life, people want to be part of that. These rural areas are seeing shrinking populations in many cases. They're seeing an aging population. And so when we think about what that means from a community level, as our population is aging in a place like Iceland, and we have an auto-dependent development pattern, we want grandma and grandpa driving their car to get groceries. Do we want all of that dependence on your single car that you have to drive? If you reach a certain age in life, you don't want to get in the car anymore, or you're not able to drive anymore. How do we allow for that accessibility in these rural areas? Thinking about schools and clinics and all those other services that we depend on when we have these rural areas, how do we make sure that those are still viable when we have 19 students in a K through 5 or whatever the grades, K through 10 school with 19 students? How do we maintain that? Because once the schools go away, that really is the death knell for community, right? Once the schools shut down, that's one less reason for people to stay in that community. So we need to think about all of these different challenges in these rural areas to recognize how do we maintain viability, because the attraction of Iceland is that culture, that identity, that connection to the land, the landscape itself. And so to maintain the viability of Iceland, we need to have that connection in these rural areas. This picture here is from our field course. these are our students. That's my co-teacher, Pluck. I always mess up her last name. She's actually, she's the former director of the National Planning Agency here in Iceland. So she was a great resource for me in this class. And this is Uppspuni. It's in kind of in between Selfoss and Hella. It's a little farm that they built a wool mill. And so it's a very small business, 4 or 5 employees. When we were actually talking with her, a couple of us heard 45 employees, and we're like, holy smokes, that's a ton of people working here. 4 to 5 is what she had said. Anyway, but they take wool from their sheep and then surrounding sheep farmers and turn it into yarn and products and so forth. It's very small, but it's an opportunity in a rural community to, one, create jobs. Even 4 to 5 jobs in a population of 500 people is a lot of people. But it also is it's an attraction. It's a reason for people to come here. And it's providing a market for those sheep farmers. It's paying a higher price for their wool than they get from a big, wholesaler. So the farmers are making more money. They're employing people here. It's an attraction, bringing people to stop here and visit this little business and make some purchases. And when we think about rural places, right, this is the opportunity they have. And so when we think as planners about what regional planning should do, this is the kind of thing we should focus on. We tend to have a mindset, and this is kind of a US thing, but I think it's prevalent even here in Iceland. We always want a big thing. We want to get 500 employees to come to our community. We want a power plant, or we want an aluminum smelter. Not always, but we want that big employer to come and save things. But this is where you actually get success, is looking at these rural, these small businesses, these entrepreneurs, the innovators, people with a cool idea who want to turn their idea into a business. It's not going to employ 100 people, but again, 4 to 5 people in a community of 500 is significant. And so when we look at how planning works in Iceland, there's 2 levels of government in Iceland. There's the national government and then municipalities. And so when we think of municipalities in the US, we think of a city. So Austin or Corning or River Falls, right? Just a town with its own. But the municipalities here in Iceland, geographically, for the most part, would be more, for a US context, like a county in size. The scale of municipalities is more like a county. But it may have a population of 500 people or maybe 1,000 people. So it's a large geographic area with a very small population. And so, so those 2 levels of government are what we have. We don't have counties and so forth like we have in the US. So the national plan is really intended to be a broad vision of goals and strategies for the country. And then underneath the national plan, our regional plans, that's required for the capital area, which is the 7 municipalities around Reykjavik. And that sort of makes sense that would be required, because obviously Reykjavik, the region, the capital region, needs to think regionally, because again, transportation, air quality, housing, those are regional issues. It's not something Reykjavik by itself can solve, or Kópavogur or whatever other municipality, because people live in Kópavogur and work in Reykjavik, or they're looking for housing and they can't afford to live in Reykjavik, so they're going to look somewhere else. So we need to think about that as a region. Excuse me. And then the Highlands region, which is kind of the middle chunk of the country. I should have put a map of it up here. Has a plan, and that one actually is interesting because it's not municipality boundaries. It's actually a geographic boundary around the Highlands, and so it incorporates many municipalities. And the way the municipality lines are drawn, kind of all of them, or most of them, end up in the Highlands. So they have kind of an area up into the Highlands. And so that's a plan for that geographic space. And that is, as a geographer, which is kind of my educational background, is always interesting to me to think about how we define a region, whether it's political, geographic, cultural, whatever it might be. And so for other regions, those are voluntary. So there's not, outside of the capital area in the Highlands, there's no requirement to have a regional plan. So again, these smaller rural municipalities aren't required to do regional planning at this point. And then municipal plans are required for all municipalities. And so these are all scaled. So the municipal goals have to connect to the national plan. So the broad strategies identified in the national plan have to be reflected in the municipal plan related to environmental protection, transportation, those kinds of things. If municipalities do agree to a regional plan, then their municipal plans would have to align with that. So it's kind of a, what's the nesting dolls? What's the right word for that?
Matryoshka.
Yes, thank you. Matroska dolls. And then site plans are for a specific development. So the municipality wants to sell some land for housing, they would do a site plan for that particular parcel of land and what that would look like. And again, they're all nested and relate to one another. And so when I was thinking about building this course and was asked to do this because this is a brand new course, it's never been taught in the planning program. It's required, so all the planning students have to take this course. And the planning program at the Agricultural University is still very small. We had 10 students. Well, started out with 10, and then one of the students had a baby, so she didn't finish the class, but she started with this. So 9 students. And overall the master's program is very small, and that's part of one of the challenges here in Iceland is the planning community is very small, and there's not a lot of professional planners working in the field. And so a lot of the planning, and I think I talked about this on a different slide, is really done by engineers, landscape architects, folks that have a different perspective than planners do. And so what we wanted to look at with this regional planning are some of those fundamentals about what planning should be about. So the demographic and economic analysis is really looking at the community's characteristics from a data standpoint. So this is like real data. So looking at population change over time, housing costs, educational attainment, age, primary businesses in the community, all of those data points that give you a picture of what the community is. So if we think about a community that has an aging population, what might be some issues that you would have to think about with an aging population? Audience, what do you think here? Yeah. Healthcare, absolutely. Transportation, yeah. Workforce, for sure, right? Yeah. Recreation's going to change, right? You're not going to build a skate park for, right next to the senior center, unless you're an orthopedic surgeon. Right. So the demographic data is important because you want that snapshot of what the community is. But with just data, you're not going to get a lot of the cultural stuff. So to your point about that idea of the community being together in the school library and the community library being the same space. So you have the students working with the public there as well, and you have that interaction and opportunity. You don't get that just from data, right? We also did a landscape assessment. Here in Iceland, particularly, the landscape is part of the identity and culture of the country. People come here to see the landscape. They want to drive the ring road and see the horses, with Hekla in the background, right? That's what people come here for. So understanding what the landscape is and how that's going to influence future development is important because obviously we're not going to build in areas with hazards. We're not going to build in areas that flood. We want to think about volcanic eruptions and what that might mean for flooding and lava. And you look at Grindavik now, right? The 1% of the population just had to pack up and move away and live somewhere else because their town is gone or still there, but not safe to live. So we want to understand what the characteristics of the landscape are when we start thinking about future development, because that's going to influence where are those areas we want to protect? What are the prime agricultural lands that we don't want to turn into holiday cottages? Where are those prime environmental habitats and ecosystems that we want to preserve? Where can we start to do reclamation of the landscape to return it to a more natural state? Right. So that's all kind of the data collection part. And then we start getting into, once we understand the characteristics of the community, how can we use that to start making informed decisions about economic development? What is the current economy of this region? what's the potential for future economic development? What's the cultural and social development? Thinking about education and places for people to recreate, all of those kinds of things. Infrastructure and energy, this is becoming a little more controversial here in Iceland as wind farms are starting to pop up in the region. We actually did our study in, has the first wind farm that's being constructed right now here in Iceland. And then also not just the actual physical site of a wind farm or a hydro plant, a reservoir, that sort of thing, but also the power lines. Because again, when we think about cultural landscapes and seeing the horses with Hekla in the background, you don't want to see a giant power line going across that landscape. But if we're creating power up in the highlands, nobody lives in the highlands, so we got to get the power from where it's being created to where the people are. And so that's going to be an issue that we need to think about. Natural hazards, obviously, is a huge issue here in Iceland. We also want to think about agricultural development. Those prime agricultural lands, especially in the south of the country where we did our study, and the areas up near Akureyri that are the prime agricultural production zones of the country, we want to protect that. We want to maintain, because agriculture is so close to the culture of Iceland, and it historically has been such a huge part of the identity. We want to maintain that. And then habitat and environments, right? Maintaining those ecological services and systems that we depend on. So those are some of the courses that we talked about. And then so the students, we picked these two municipalities, Rangárþing and Ásarapur, and it took me almost the entire semester to say those even remotely close to being correct, and I'm probably still mangling them, but so they're south, kind of south central, about an hour and a half from here. Hekla is the main town. It's in Rangárþing, it's over here near the border. Ásarapur, you can see, is a small piece here in the south, and then the Highlands region up here. So it's a municipality with two different disconnected geographic spaces, which is, coming from the US, is just mind-boggling to me that you have one municipality that's not connected, but that's a different issue. So they did a demographic and economic analysis. They they collected data from Statistics Iceland, other sources, to come up with that snapshot in time of what the community looks like now. The landscape assessment, they did a desk assessment using GIS data. And this is something where Iceland really excels, is having access to a ton of great data. You can find pretty much anything you want about the landscape, protected lands, hazardous areas, prime agricultural lands, all that stuff is there. Really nice. And then we actually went and visited the site. So we went and spent a couple days in the region driving around, checking things out, just to get that hands-on view of what you actually see. Because again, like with the demographic analysis, when you look at data from a GIS system and you're looking at a map of the area, it doesn't tell you what it actually is. It doesn't give you that familiarity you need to make decisions, because you don't see, oh, these holiday cottages are all built on the tops of the hills. So when you're driving by, what you see are a bunch of little cottages on the hilltop instead of the mountains that you're actually wanting to look at, right? Things like that you can't see from a map, you can see when you're on site. And then we asked them to select those areas most suitable for new development. So this region is expected to grow very slowly, but still they're going to see some growth. So where does it make sense for that new development to go? Where do we want to see new housing built, new businesses built, those kinds of things? And then come up with goals and strategies related to all those other elements: economic development, housing, recreation, those different elements I spoke about a minute ago. And the idea with this was to give them that hands-on project of actually developing a plan, going through the process of looking at a region, understanding what its challenges and opportunities are, and then coming up with some recommendations for what they could actually do to solve these problems. And one thing we didn't do with this process, because it just wasn't really feasible in the time that we had, was public engagement. And that's one area I think where Iceland maybe doesn't do as good of a job as we do in the US. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So what the students came up with as we went through this process was that idea of accessibility. And so when I say accessibility and talk about transportation, it's not just about, can we make it easier to drive cars here? we really want to think about transportation from the mindset of accessibility for everyone, whether they're in a car, transit, walking, riding, whatever it might be. And obviously in rural areas, you're not going to bike 10 miles to the grocery store. That's just not reasonable. But can we make, for those areas where we can create more accessibility through alternative transportation, is that possible? And so this picture here is from our site visit, and that's not an F road. We're not in the highlands trying to cross a river. That's one of the supposed municipality roads paved somewhere under that water. And this is just a road people drive on to get to their holiday cottages, to get around the municipality. That's what we drove through. Now imagine if Hekla were erupting and it's the middle of the night and the road looks like this, and you're trying to get to safety. That turns an unpleasant experience into a life-threatening experience. I mean, it was scary for me just in a bus driving through here. I couldn't imagine doing it in my tiny little car. I probably wouldn't have made it anyway. Right. So this is the kind of thing we need to think about, right? Especially in these rural areas that don't have a big population pushing to make these changes with the financial resources to pay for the necessary improvements to fix this problem. So there needs to be a different approach. We can't leave it to these small municipalities to solve these problems by themselves. Landscape preservation was a big issue that came up. These are rural municipalities that we were working in. Cottage homes are a big thing here. I'm still not quite sure the vibe of them because, again, what I've seen of them is it's just a bunch of little houses stuck together with nothing else around it, but that's what people do here. So, but how can they be designed to allow them to be accessible, right? Create that opportunity for people to have their cottage home, but not do it in a way that detracts from the landscape, or not turning prime agricultural land into cottage homes because the farmer can't make money as a farmer, so he sells the land to build cottage homes, right? Those are the issues we need to think about. Maintaining the rural character, right? Protecting those ag lands, habitat, thinking about hazards. Economic development, we recognize that the agriculture is the foundation of the economy here, but it's not economically viable for most farmers. Most of the farmers have second jobs. The younger generation is not going into farming. It's the same issue we have in Wisconsin, where I'm from, right? We had 800 dairy farms closed in 2018. We have on our license plate, America's Dairyland, says in big bold letters, and yet our dairy industry is collapsing. Same thing happening here in Iceland, right? So how can we ensure those farmers have a future? And then that idea of capacity building, recognizing these are small municipalities, there's not a lot of, they don't have professional planners on staff. So how can, as we're developing these plans for these rural areas, make sure they're accessible to the decision makers? Because the goal of having a plan is that somebody can take that document, and when they sit down to do their budget or they sit down to decide where development should occur, they have a guide they can use to help make that decision, right? That's what planning should be about. So kind of looking broadly at Iceland more generally, just again, coming from the US and what I've learned since I've been here, Iceland, especially, it's funny, you talked about the volcano, that one. Obviously caused huge disruption in travel, but it also was a huge attraction. Right? If you look at tourism numbers in Iceland after that eruption, the numbers started to skyrocket. Then you had Game of Thrones, and then apparently one of the waterfalls was in Stranger Things, if anybody watches Stranger Things. And so, right, it sort of became a pop culture thing to come to Iceland. And that became really great because all these people were coming here bringing lots of dollars into Iceland. Also caused lots of problems in these rural areas with not enough hotels, lots of more traffic on the roads, guides that just park their buses in the middle of the street square and let 50 people out to go do things and block traffic and cause problems. So yes, tourism is great, but it also has a downside that we need to think about. So the reliance on tourism, I think, is a problem, honestly, for Iceland just generally. Because it's become such a big part of the economy and it seems like easy money. That's, to me, economic diversification is really important. We saw some of that at the ocean cluster that we went to. Some of y'all were there. Right, looking at, we have this resource of fishing and the ocean, what can we do with that, right? How can we turn that into business? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. Looking at those existing assets, so certainly tourism is not going to go away unless airline gas goes away, which could happen given the rest of the world. But looking at what you have and how you can leverage that more effectively is important. I think food independence is a huge issue. Again, looking at global events and thinking about importing as much food as Iceland does, you have really significant agricultural assets already. You have the opportunity with geothermal heat and abundant water to do a lot more with greenhouses and vertical farming and hydroponics and all sorts of things. That's going to increase business for farmers. It's going to increase economic opportunity. It's going to create jobs. It's going to do a lot of things. Plus, you're going to reduce your dependence on shipping and things coming in from somewhere else. And again, we live in uncertain times. And so the more that Iceland can do for that, there's just lots of knock-on benefits for that one. And then I think in these rural areas, particularly, the idea of nodal development. So in the regions we were working in, Ásarafur and Rangárþing, Hekla is the main city, and it's got the healthcare and schools and all of that. But there are other areas in the region, Þingvabyr, kind of on the coast, where there's a node, right? And so those areas where you have already something can be the nucleus to grow more and focus development on those areas where you already have something there. Whether it's a community center, a swimming pool, a small school, right? Put the development there and maintain that rural character in the rest of the region, right? And that allows you to focus your development dollars where you can get the most bang for your buck. Thinking about, again, accessibility. So it may be improving the roads. We like to build new stuff. And again, this is kind of an American idea. We like to build new stuff. We don't like to maintain stuff so much. And I see some of that in Iceland as well. There's always talk about a new tunnel here. I heard talk of building a tunnel to Hamai, right? Like, okay, that's a 5-minute ferry ride, but whatever. Okay, it's a little longer than that, but why would you build a tunnel there for 3,000 cars, right? You can spend hundreds of millions of krona to build a tunnel that's going to serve very few people. So maintain what you have, don't build new stuff. And then that idea of landscape protection. So when we look at holiday cottages, can those holiday cottages be more clustered? So instead of one house on say 3 hectares, can we build houses on clustered together on 5 hectares of the land and let the rest remain undeveloped? Because you can maintain that rural character even if the homes are closer together, which people think, oh, they're dense, they're going to be like a city. If you design it right, you can actually cluster the homes and still maintain that rural character, and the rest of the land remains undeveloped. So you get all the ecosystem services, you get all of the benefits of not developing all that stuff. You also save money in infrastructure. You're not building as many miles of roads and as many feet of water line and all of those things, right? So cluster development, preserving that landscape, and then infrastructure maintenance I talked about, right? So what I've learned, because Iceland developed, urban development in Iceland happened so much later, and was really in that post-50s automobile-dominated era. This is what Reykjavik looks like. Certainly not the rural areas, but the cities look like U.S. cities. So you could pick this up and dump it in any U.S. suburb, and it would fit right in, right? So we have. And some of my students, when we were talking about that idea of accessibility and trying to reduce car dependency, one of my students said, but people in Iceland think of their car like a coat. Because the weather's bad, because you have, it's difficult to get around just walking or cycling or whatever, right? People use their car for everything because the weather is oftentimes not great. But I mean, I've been here since the end of December, and there were people on their bikes in January, February, March. I mean, they do it all the time. And if you create the infrastructure to support cycling in winter, trails that are maintained, that are plowed with snow and ice and that sort of thing, people will do it even in bad weather, right? You can adapt to bad weather if the infrastructure supports it. So As I mentioned earlier, right, there's a different mindset with planning here. More engineers are involved, and engineers solve problems. And I'm going to totally stereotype, so any engineers that are with me, right? If you ask an engineer to fix this road, they're going to say, "Oh, just build more lanes, make it wider. You're going to move more cars." A planner's going to look at that and say, "Let's think about something different. What if we build a bike lane? Could somebody, instead of driving your car, you can safely ride a bicycle to this shopping center." Then I could choose to do that instead of driving my car, right? And so planners have that holistic mindset to look at what are the economic impacts of this, what are the social impacts of this, what are the environmental impacts of this. And I think that holistic mindset is really needed, especially in Iceland, given in these rural areas, there's more to consider than just moving people quickly. There is less emphasis on public engagement than there is in the US. I think to your point about that sweet spot, finding a good middle. In the US, we've almost gone too far with public engagement, and we've created too many veto points where the public can stop necessary projects. So we have, rich people in Martha's Vineyard that shut down wind farms because they don't want to look out their window and see a wind farm. Okay, if we want to be environmentally sensitive, right? Same people that say we need to decarbonize the economy are saying, no, don't build a wind farm in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right. So the NIMBY mindset is certainly prevalent. And we see some of that in Iceland. I know the debate over the bus rapid transit line has been pretty heated here in Reykjavik. But there is less emphasis now. So again, I think there is a sweet spot with public engagement to understand what people's concerns and challenges are, because that's part of the problem solving process, but not letting it be a automatic veto on stuff being done differently or better. And then there's again just less planning capacity here, right? Fewer professional planners, less kind of understanding of the role of planning in this process, because it is typically driven by engineers and folks like that. So those are things I've learned since I've been here. Iceland is very different from the US. So the idea of like municipally owned land was kind of new to me. I mean, I was involved with my master's degree with the Stapleton project in Denver, where the city owned the airport, they shut it down and built a new community there. So that was kind of the model of how a lot of development happens in Iceland, where the municipality owns the land and then sells it to, they sell individual lots to people to build homes on. So there's a lot of opportunity with that. If the municipality controls the land, they can do things differently because it's their land, and they can say, if you're going to build here and we're going to sell it to you, it needs to be like this, right? So there's a little more opportunity here in Iceland to create different kinds of development than this. All right. Luckily, with the agricultural university, lots of opportunities for collaboration. My University of Wisconsin River Falls is a small school, 45,000 students. But within that, the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environmental Science, which is where my program is housed, is basically a mirror of the agricultural university. Dairy production, meat production, planning, conservation. It's like we're the same thing, basically. So there's lots of opportunities going forward for our two universities to really collaborate, whether it's through agricultural education. We do a lot. We train agricultural teachers at our school. Humane Handling Institute is a program our university offers to producers to treat their animals well. That could be something that we could partner here to offer. We also have the Farm and Industry Short Course. I don't think I mentioned it on here, but again, that's another program for producers to help them be successful. So that's a program that the Agricultural University could take on and offer to producers here in Iceland. Conservation and restoration, it's obviously a big important issue here in Iceland. We do that so we can prepare planning. One of the guys at the Ag University has this vision for Banare, where the main campus of the university is, for development there. And so he's talking about doing like summer programs to bring people over and then plan a city of 80,000 people to be here. I mean, that seems like a lot, but right, but lots of ways we can work together. So, and then at a broader scale, right, it's a small school. The Agricultural University has about 500 students, which is super tiny from the US perspective. And very small, even for Iceland. We're a school of 4,500 students, so it's a very small school in the US context. And managing, just how a small university can be successful in changing times and economic conditions and so forth. And here are just pictures from some of the fun I had around the country. So, yeah, I had a great time here. I spent a lot of time at the pool and the hot tub. Yeah, I'm gonna miss that. That's probably the thing I'm gonna miss the most. That's, the hot tub at the end of the day. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have time for maybe one. Yes.
Sorry, I talked a lot.
Okay,
Okay, one question, so you decide, yes.
Wondering if you've ever researched about maybe Iceland's journey into green infrastructure, or like if native plants or trees can be a part of urban planning.
Yeah, and when we were on our site visit, we visited Analogues, the Land and Forest Agency. And that's really interesting because the forest part of Land and Forest is all about bringing, reforestation and greening, and actually trying to create a timber industry in Iceland. But they're doing it with exotic species. So spruces and trees that aren't native to Iceland. And so in the land part of Land and Forest is all about reclamation and restoration and getting rid of invasive species. So you have this sort of weird thing happening because there were two independent agencies that were smushed together. And so now you have one agency really trying to fight invasive species and one importing them to grow them to create a new industry. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I do have a student also. Sorry, her master's thesis is actually looking at using road right of way for carbon capture, and actually thinking about how to design outside of the safety zones, obviously, but in those areas that are part of the roadway, how they can be used more effectively as carbon storage.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I talked a lot. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, let's move it along. Yeah, so now we're going to hear from Erica, who's an associate professor in animal science at North Dakota State. She applied for a grant again through the Request for Scholar program on behalf of Polar University College, which is starting an exciting new program. And Erica is helping them to develop that in curriculum. It's a really unique award that really got us excited. And so we're really curious to learn how the project's going and how life has been at Polar. So please take the floor.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, as Linda said, I've been at Polar since January. This is a picture of the beautiful community that we've been living in, my family. And it's in the Skagafjörður region of Iceland. That's the star, which is probably really much bigger than the town actually is on that map. The community is in this valley between the fjords, and it's pretty culturally significant for Iceland. So it was established in 1106 as a center of religion and education. This is the oldest stone church in Iceland. It was built in 1763. And so it was also there's two bishop seats in Iceland, and one is here in Polar. So quite culturally significant. So I would say if you haven't been up here, you should really should make the trip. They also have a museum of the Icelandic horse. So there's three majors at Polar University. One is aquaculture and fish biology. The second is tourism studies, and the third is equine science. And so that is the department that I was working with while I was at Polar. Polar is internationally renowned for its equine science program in both teaching and research, particularly with regard to the Icelandic horse. The Icelandic horse, has anybody had a chance to ride an Icelandic horse? since you've been here? Yes, okay. And so the Icelandic horse is quite unique. So the bloodlines of this breed have been maintained for over 1,000 years. So that means that there's been no horses allowed in Iceland during that time. And once an Icelandic horse leaves the country, they're not allowed to come back. So again, that has maintained the preservation, but it's also greatly reduced the risk of disease. Because if you think about that, it's been basically an isolated herd, right? And so if you have disease introduced, it could essentially decimate the whole population. So we don't want that to happen. So there's quite strict biosecurity rules for clothing that you can bring and that sort of thing. And so that's an important aspect of this horse. And Iceland was very proud of this animal, as we should be. They're pretty cool creatures. Whoops. Oh dear. There we go. I got it. Thank you. All the old folks up here having trouble with the arrows. And then I would also say that Hólar is quite visionary for recognizing the potential to develop an animal-assisted services curriculum and training for Iceland. And so that was my role, was to work with staff and faculty at Hólar, as well as the community and stakeholders to work on building resources in this area. Just so we get everybody on the same page. So I was focused on horses, but we're looking really more broadly to include animals. And so animal assisted services is a goal-oriented and structured intervention that intentionally incorporates animals into health, education, and human services for the purpose of therapeutic gains in the people receiving the services while maintaining the well-being of the animal. And that's a really important part. So all those highlighted words up there are the important pieces of this particular definition. And so we're seeing global growth in this area, which is fantastic. So that necessitates, I would say, 3 really important things. Right? And the first is that we have trained professionals that are doing this work. And so typically you would have a professional that's doing this work with a primary discipline, right? And they would need additional training to incorporate animals ethically, successfully into the work that they're doing. We also need animals who are trained for this work and professionals who understand how to do that and recognize distress signals and all of those things to keep the animals safe, to ensure well-being, and to also ensure the safety of the participants in this work. And then finally, it needs to be done when it's appropriate only. Okay, and so you aren't a mental health professional who thinks, I bring my dog to the office, although that happens a lot, right? And now I'm doing animal assisted work. That's not it at all. It's its own. There's a great deal of training that really needs to go into this profession for it to be done correctly and ethically. An example, which this is very cool, but another example of sort of global highlighting of this, there was a Icelandic horse, this was just last month actually, named Prestur, who was welcomed to London's Parliament because they had a group talking about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And Prestur was welcomed there to highlight the therapeutic role of horses in working with neurodivergent people. So again, very cool, but also really then necessitates the need for education in this area so that it's done correctly. So I sort of divided up my experience, my Fulbright experience, into these 4 areas. So I'm going to touch on each of those as we go through. The course that I taught was incorporating horses in work with people, which is a loose translation. So another thing that we've been figuring out is that it's really difficult actually to translate from English to Icelandic and Icelandic back to English the work that we're doing. It's not necessarily direct translation. It doesn't always make sense. So that's a little bit of a challenge. And so throughout the course, a small course, so I had 4 students in the class. One actually ended up dropping the class. The classes at Hólar, they have 3 cohorts for the equine science. So there's 20 students typically per cohort. The second year students just had 12 this year. So it's a rigorous program to get into Hólar, and they have very intense schedule as far as what they need to do. They're taking care of their own horses. They've got incredible amounts of work to do. So I've been very impressed with the students and what they've been doing. But the course I loosely have divided up into these 5 areas that I'm going to speak about, with equine well-being is a through line throughout. Okay, so anytime we're doing work with animals, that needs to be a consideration. So we talked about the history briefly. This is not a new thing, partnering horses and humans for healing. So we can find references as far back as 600 BC. I also was excited to find this Icelandic saga that spoke about Agni suffering from a great illness, and she found the most relief while riding a horse. So I thought I was very excited about that. It was very fascinating, so I had to put that in there. The other topic that is really important to discuss and understand is models of disability. So when we're talking about working with people with different needs, it's important to understand different ways of looking at disability. This is just two. These are the two kind of main ones. So one is a medical model and one is a social model. So if you look at this picture, we see a woman in a wheelchair in the center, and it says, "Everyone is welcome, come on in." Did she get in? She cannot get in because she's in a wheelchair and there's stairs there. So a medical model would say that there's an impairment or a problem with the woman. Okay, so it's the woman's fault, if you would say, and give her some prosthetics and then she can use the stairs. Versus a social model says, well, the built environment is the problem. It's not the human. And if we have a ramp there, everybody can access it, right? A woman who uses a wheelchair, a dad pushing a stroller with his kids, somebody who's got a cart of groceries, anything. And so that kind of touches on universal design a little bit too. And probably the urban planning thing, if we're thinking about accessibility, right, and inclusion and all of those things, these models of disability are also part of that, right? We also have to spend some time talking about scope of practice. And so this just means you stay in your lane and you do what you're trained to do, right? So we use this framework from Binder et al. I will say Amy's name wrong. That's with the IHIO organization. And so we have this broad umbrella of animal assisted services. And underneath that, we have a treatment focus. So these are going to be therapists. These are going to be mental health professionals who are incorporating animals into their work. We have educators. Okay, so like Anne, maybe you could get additional training and bring mini horses for reading, right, to the classroom. And then animal assisted support services. So our riding instructors, which are being trained at HUAR, okay, are maybe going to adapt their teaching style, and they would fit into this category. Okay, so there's different places where people fit, and it's very important that you do what you're trained to do and not anymore. We also need to think about precautions and contraindications when we're partnering people with horses. And so if we think about a precaution, that's something we need to be careful of, right? So if we have a little boy with an autism spectrum disorder, for instance, oftentimes one of the characteristics that we see in that population is impulsivity, like super fast moving. So 1 minute they're here and the next minute they're like, phew, they're gone. Okay. If you have them in a barn with horses, you need to be careful about that, or you need to pay attention. So that's going to be a precaution. A contraindication is something where the risk is going to outweigh the benefit. And an example of this would be if we have an individual with uncontrolled generalized tonic-clonic seizures, you're not putting them on the back of the horse. Okay, that's not safe for the person. It's not safe for the horse. It's not safe for the people assisting them. So there are some things that are contraindicated for incorporating animals into treatments or services for humans. We also spend some time talking about benefits. Like what do we know physically, cognitively, mental health wise that animals can help with, right? And then talking about some theories. We had a guest lecturer from Germany come to speak about some of the different theories about why do we see reduced anxiety, maybe, right? Why do we see maybe improved direction following? Okay, so talking about physiological, psychological, and social theories about why we see some of those things that happen in the human body. And the favorite part is the practical skills piece. So this is what I love to do the most. And so in these pictures, the picture on your left is a little chestnut gelding named Surkur, and we were getting him used to the mounting platform. And so in Iceland, so in the United States, we use mounting blocks a lot. Okay, it's like a block that you step up, you get on your horse. They get on from the ground too. The horses are also smaller, okay? But we typically use blocks like this or raised platforms for folks because they might have the flexibility or the strength to be able to get on the horse from the ground. It's actually also better for the horse. It's less stress on their back, right? If you're not hauling yourself up onto the back of the horse. But you also need to make sure the horse is okay with this because even though we have people riding on their backs, that's it's a different thing, right? Who does that? Tigers do this, right? Like wolves do this kind of thing. And so it's it's a different perspective that they have to be okay with before we put somebody on. And then there's different mounting techniques. So you see there's 4 people around this horse, and this is a pretty typical picture of what we would see in our program back in the United States, or any program if a person needs support on both sides. Okay, and then you also would have a sidewalker waiting up here. That's a lot for that horse to manage, right? And so it's very important, again, for the professional, in this case, it would be a riding instructor, to understand. And also they're having to watch to make sure what's happening with the rider when they're getting on, but they're also, the horse handler's paying attention to the horse, but it's ultimately the instructor's role to do that. So there's a lot to pay attention to. They've got to direct all these people. Okay, so it's a lot to think about. And there's also different dismounting techniques. So we usually would swing your leg over the croup or the back of the horse and dismount. If somebody's got really tight adductor muscles, they're not going to be able to do that, or the muscles, you know, in between your knees would have to bring their thigh or their leg over the front of the horse and get down. So there's different ways to do that. It's also super important that the students understand the movement of the horses. Okay, so first of all, our horses need to be sound, meaning their gait needs to be symmetrical and they cannot be lame. That's an asymmetric gait is a nice way of saying the horse is lame. Okay, and we don't want that because it's A, not good for the horse, and B, it's not good for the human that's sitting on their back. Because if a human is sitting on the horse's back and they're getting irregular pattern of movement, that doesn't help to regulate the body, which is what we're doing, right? Of putting them on the back of the horse. And so we have to look at movement. Students need to be able to recognize what's symmetrical, what's asymmetrical with the horse's gait. And then they also need to be able to feel the amount of movements that's produced in their body. Okay, so when you sit on a horse and the horse walks, it moves your pelvis and it moves your body, right? And it moves it in different ways, depending on the horse, depending on the amount of impulsion that they have in their walk. And so we think about 2 things when we're looking at doing these assessments of the horses. We think about how much movement is produced in your body. And we just qualify that very subjectively: minimum, moderate, maximum. Okay, that's the way we do it at our program. And then we also talk about the type of movement. So you can have a lateral or side to side type of movement that's predominantly produced in the pelvis. You can have a rotational, or you can have an anterior posterior. Now your pelvis is doing all of those things. It's just that oftentimes a horse will typically produce one of those movements more than another. Okay. And so it's important to know more so the amount of movement, because if we have an individual who has very low muscle tone, for instance, okay, you're not putting them on a horse that's got like a big movement, they won't be able to ride. Like they might not even be able to stand. They might not even be able to maintain their posture or position, or they will fatigue very quickly. Okay. Versus if you have an individual who's very sensory seeking or looking for input into their body, they get the big moving horse. Okay. Because that's going to sort of, what we would say is regulate their sensory system. And now they can sort of focus. It's like a weighted blanket or a weighted vest. You could think about it that way. Now they can listen to the therapist or the instructor, right? A little bit better, because they're not wondering, where is my body at? Okay. Another thing that we're working on is curriculum development. And so we have a draft right now, and this has gone through many drafts, and it will continue to go through drafts as well. But we have a post-bachelor's curriculum and human-animal interaction. And so the micro-credential is basically an introduction, okay, to this area, to this field. And then the diploma is additional coursework plus a practical piece. Okay, so the practical piece is very important in my mind. If people are going to be implementing or partnering with animals, incorporating them into whatever service they're providing, it's great to understand all the information and theories and history and stuff behind that. But if you don't know what to do when you have a child sit down on the ground and refuse to get up, and it's time for them to ride, or they're not going to put their helmet on, right? You need to know how to manage that and how to handle that. So those practical skills are really important. And then the master's would be adding a thesis to that. Focusing on the why again, and the practical skills are important. And then this obviously is going to help to inform best practices, right, in the field. And this again is important in Iceland. There's currently no formal training for this in the country. So people have to go outside Iceland, which isn't a bad thing, right? It's great to get different perspectives, but it would also be nice if you stay in country to get some of that training, right? So this would be the first academic curriculum in Iceland in this training and so some applicable professions that you may incorporate animals with proper training are mental health fields, physiotherapy, occupational speech therapy, talked a little bit about these, education. Okay. These are not Icelandic horses, that's right. These are little miniature horses that we have back at my program in North Dakota. And riding instruction. So riding instructors who are going to learn to then partner horses and individuals with disabilities because we have some adaptations that you would need to make. We are also planning a conference next weekend. And so we are planning this in cooperation with GLOW. And GLOW is a rehabilitation and early intervention center here in Reykjavik, and they just celebrated their 70th anniversary. They're actually putting a conference on today and tomorrow. So Gunhildur and Guga are the therapists that we're working with at GLOW. And so we're grateful that they agreed to do one conference and then do another one the next weekend, because that's a lot of work. They have really led the way in this discipline in Iceland. They've hosted 2 previous conferences in this area. And Guga, who was one of the physiotherapists at GLOW, has been incorporating equine movement into her treatment sessions as a physiotherapist for 20 years. And so it's wonderful that there are people all over Iceland doing this type of work. And so the goal for this conference, one of them is to connect everybody, right? To get everybody connected, to find out what people are doing, to feel like they have a community and that they're supported, because it's very hard to do this work in the silo, right? When you don't have people to bounce ideas off or to talk with about how hard it's sometimes, right? Funding is difficult. You can't just shut your horse off and forget about it for the weekend. You got to feed it, you got to take care of it, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. We have speakers from 8 countries that will be there. 2 Fulbright speakers on one, and then in the back, Nina, raise your hand. We have Nina Ekholm-Frey here, a Fulbright specialist from the University of Denver. So she'll be here for 2 weeks. That's also very exciting. And registration is open until May 11th. So you can just snap that QR code and come and join us at Polar. Another thing that we're working on is a survey. So we're doing this in partnership with the tourism department. I am not a qualitative researcher. I like surveys for class, but right. So this would be an actually well done survey. And so we're partnering with the tourism department at Polar, who has much more experience in doing these types of things than I do. And the goal for this initial survey is to understand, first of all, who's providing services in Iceland, right? Like who's doing it, what's their background in education, what training do they have, and then also who are they serving? So what are the diagnoses of the people who are being served and what are their ages? So we're just sort of trying to do a very brief, broad, get information, but then the plan later would be to get information on the horses. So this is going to be strictly for equine assistant services. We're not going to try to do the other animals yet, but just getting some basic information, because right now we don't know this. Don't know any of that. And so we really need that, again, to inform education and training that's needed the most. Professionally, this has given me a wonderful opportunity to just think more deeply about equine assisted services, right? So anybody that is teaching in a profession, you know that you've got everyday tasks to do, and you have this whole list of manuscripts that your webinars you want to watch and things that you want to do. And I was able to do some of that, so I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. I also was introduced to Icelandic horsemanship. So I've been riding horses for over 40 years. The first time I was on an Icelandic horse was in January. I've been very lucky. This is Mantle. He's one of the school horses at Holar. They have many amazing school horses who are very well trained. He's a 6-year-old Pinto Gelding, who's a pace horse. So there's 4-gated Icelandic horses and 5-gated. He's a 5-gated horse. And so he's pretty cool. And the students and instructors at Adler have been also fantastic. There have been some clinicians that have come in, so I've been able to learn also from them. So that has been just a really phenomenal opportunity that I appreciate greatly. It's also always very interesting to see how different places, countries, people manage their horses. Okay, and so that's something that's interesting to me as a professional, as a horse person. I've lived in many different states in the US, and it's very different. The vastness of our country, right, really dictates where the horses are, how they are, money and mindset about how those horses are managed. And so it'll be interesting to just kind of to think about that a little bit. And then also this hopefully will help when I submit my full professor portfolio over the next year. Yeah, let's hope. Fingers crossed. And so future, again, we're still working on this curriculum. We're going to be showing or revealing the curriculum draft that we have at the conference to get feedback from the therapists that are doing the work, just the stakeholders, the attendees, to see if it meets the needs. Is this not enough? Is it, what's missing from it? What do they feel is needed? The survey again, going to figure out some ways to come back here and teach a little bit in Iceland. I think we also have, like Chris was talking about, some opportunities for exchanges. So I'm at North Dakota State University, and we both HOLAR and NDSU have equine science and tourism departments. So I think that there's maybe some really cool opportunities there. And then this, I'm actually really excited about. So both the University of Iceland and NDSU have programs for young adults with intellectual disabilities. And I've actually already emailed my counterpart at NDSU, Molly McKinnon, to say, would it be so cool if we could do an exchange? And she said, I was thinking about that this year. So anyway, that I think would be amazing to be able to do something like that with those students. And this is a little bit of just a fun side note. The Icelandic Immigration Center is in Hofsás, Iceland, which is about 25 minutes away from where we live. And it features an exhibit on immigration to the Dakotas and Canada. So North Dakota State University is in Fargo, North Dakota, on the east part of the state, right next to Minnesota. And there's a picture of Fargo, Moorhead, down in the Immigration Center. And there was quite a large number of Icelanders who emigrated to Covenant County in North Dakota. And so Mountain, North Dakota is kind of the center of that. And they have hosted the longest running cultural celebration in North Dakota, 127 years, which is for us, right, in the US. And so they are also very excited. They just announced this year that they are breaking ground. They were able to get some land donated and purchase some of it to build this Icelandic Cultural and Heritage Center. And so they're hoping that this will be ready to go next August 1st. So very excited about that. And oops, you back up. This has been incredible. So I've met many amazing people and horses. So this is my son, Oscar. So he's been with me since January. He goes to school in Hofsás, rides the bus every day and loves it. And then my husband and our middle daughter, Ida, joined us in mid-March. And then our oldest daughter, there in the corner, is going to be joining us on the 18th of May for a little trek around Iceland in a camper van. And so just a couple pictures from Akureyri and the horses. And again, Hellier. I'm a big fan of Hellier. He's a good guy. And so thank you to my home institution, which I forgot to put up here, but thank you to NDSU and all the people back there that made the world still go around without me. So that's good. And HOLAR and the Icelandic horses. I would not be here without them. I thank the Fulbright Commission Iceland, as well as the U.S. State Department and Fulbright. And I think that Fulbright is the embodiment of common humanity. And I think that it's been really inspiring to hear these students and listen to what they have been doing and just their future plans. And you're giving us hope for humanity. So thank you. That's all I have.
Such an inspiring project. Thank you. Do we have any questions about this? Yes?
Yeah.
With the Icelandic horses being such a like separated breed, how are there not problems with like cancer and inbreeding?
Well, so they've been very careful, and so far, and I've asked about that too, because I thought, oh, that could be problematic, right? And so they have this incredible database that they keep, right? And so they're very careful about breeding. And you can find this world thing is what it's called, but you can find data and information about pretty much any Icelandic horse. And so carefully, I guess that's my answer to your question, is that they're careful about it. But I do wonder, I mean, that probably can't last forever, right? Because it's finite amount. They're not even, in some places you can import semen, like stallion semen, to inseminate the mares, but you can't do that in Iceland. You can inseminate mares with stallion semen from stallions in Iceland, right? But you can't import it, okay? Because of the disease risk, because it's sexually transmitted diseases, just like in people. So they're really careful and protective of that. You can export semen, okay? And so there's Icelandic horses, I think, in over 22 countries in the world. And so Germany, I think, is the second highest population of Icelandic horse. And there's probably, I think, about 40% of the students who are at Polar in the Equine Science program are international students from Europe. And there's one young one from the US, but many students from Germany, or Sweden, that come to specifically learn about horsemanship. We have time. Yeah.
Are there any behavioral differences between horses back in the US and Iceland?
Yeah, so I would say this is a very broad sweep. Okay, let me just start out by saying that the horses that I have encountered have been quite, I would say, a little bit more mellow, for a lack of better terminology. And so that could be for many different reasons, right? And I certainly haven't been in contact with all Icelandic horses, but the horses at Polar University are very well trained. They're very quiet, right? The horses that we've visited at different locations, they're school horses that are together in groups. And so I've seen less behaviors, like less antagonistic behaviors, I guess you could say, with horses here. But again, that's a very broad, very broad statement. So I'm sure I know that we've got differences. I was listening to one of the instructors who said it can be anywhere from Arabians to a draft horse, right? Like talking about the personality or the energy that the horses have. But I will say, generally, they seem a little bit more mellow. And the height of them is actually perfect for the work. That's another kind of good thing about the Icelandic horse equine assisted services work is the size, okay? Because we often help the sidewalk of riders, and if you've got to do this, you can't do that for very long without needing a shoulder repair. So, yeah, great. You're welcome.
Thank you.
There's one more question if we have time.
Well, if it's very
I
short,
think it's very short. It's Oman Candy. Yes.
I can get us out of here by 5, don't worry.
Are there any Icelandic horses in the US?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes, many.
Many.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Are you taking one home?
Well, I would love to take Hellier home, but no, not yet.
but she'll be coming back.
I'll be coming back. So
Yes,
okay. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So our final speaker of the day is biologist Gary, professor at Texas A&M, and he has spent the semester as a Fulbright scholar at the Faculty of Life and Environmental Sciences at the University of Iceland. We've been teaching graduate students as well as doing field work, focusing, I believe, on the presence, prevalence, and spread of avian malaria. So we are very interested to hear about your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Melinda. I'm gonna start with thanking everybody that might be responsible for me being here. Might have read the package of links that I completely forgot to put in a slide acknowledging people. So thank you. So there was one call for a biology, just a general biologist. It wasn't a specialty like most of you guys are on. So I figured that a lot of people might want to work here, but only a few would be stupid enough to also to do the teaching part when they're actually in sabbatical. So that seemed to work in my favor. So it's just a general biogeography class that a lot of readings, me leading the first few sets of discussions, and then graduate students, and there were actually a few undergraduates in there as well. And this kind of came up earlier, trying to force students to actually talk instead of sitting there passively.
Mm-hmm.
So part of their grade relied on them piping up and trying to answer questions and doing presentations. So it was they hated the part when we went back a couple of hundred years where the continents were still viewed as static. And And, you know, the early theories of biogeography up through the present, but they eventually got them. They figured out that as you're a biogeographer, you have to be kind of a jack of all trades. So that brings us to this. So I've been working in this disease ecology space for about 12 years now. A colleague of mine just said, hey, you want to go to Armenia and sample birds? And I said, sure. And it just kind of snowballed into this long-term project. So disease ecology is just the interaction between pathogens, parasites, and their host. So some examples of the parasitism is a non-mutual relationship where one organism is exploiting another organism. And so what are some possible parasites and pathogens affecting birds? A whole range of things, and some of these you've probably heard of: bacteria, arboviruses, parasitic protozoans, helminths. And then we get into things like ectoparasite arthropods like mites and biting midges, biting flies, and those are going to come back in a minute. And I want to point out to the people in the back that I figured out the arrows right away. No, they were giggling. They were laughing at all you said. So parasitic organisms reduce host fitness and impose a selective force within natural populations. Sorry, this is going to be biology. So this is going to affect host population dynamics. And in turn, this is going to affect life history evolution for individuals and, you know, more broadly for the population without giving like group selection. So the costs of this parasitic relationship are primarily energetic. So supply of energy for any organism is going to be limited. That amount of energy is not going to be constant or uniform. It's going to vary seasonally. You know, you're going to have more resources available in the summer than you're going to have in winter. So habitat's going to create issues with how that energy is allotted or available to be taken up. And so the use of energy for one purpose is going to reduce the amount of energy that's available for other uses. So we're going to get these trade-offs, which are going to influence exposure and resistance. So let's see that here next. Yeah, so trade-offs are basically you have to use one thing. You're in this context, energy for one thing, at potentially at the expense for using it for something else. So when I introduce trade-offs in my ornithology class, my usual for students that they seem to be able to grasp quickly is your life history trade-off is whether you're going to study for your next exam tonight or you're going to go to a bar. There are life history trade-offs that are going to be involved in this situation. So if we have an unparasitized bird, they're going to have three basic things that they're going to be devoting those resources to: maintenance, production, so having kids and things, and then some fat as a buffer for future use. For a parasitized individual, there's a problem with that. We lose fat. We have to allocate a lot of energy towards defense and immune responses. So those are going to have potentially cascading effects. So pathogen persistence, these are just mechanisms that are allowing persistence in this context, avian migrants. So we see a lot of things like crowding at breeding sites. So each of these lines is reflecting different flight paths, but all going basically between Northern Europe and Africa for a bunch of different bird species. So these could all be carrying different diseases. So if you're bringing a bunch of species from Africa and you're getting them kind of packed into Europe, you're just expanding the pool of things that any infection could jump to, the number of individuals. We also know that the stress of migration can trigger these latent infections. So a bird might have been parasitized with malaria in the past, has basically recovered from it, but those little bugs can stay. I forgot it's being recorded. It can stay, they basically stay inside you. They get sequestered in tissues, and heavy stress can make them light back up again, and then cause those long-term problems. And then we see things like spillover, migration stopover. So lots of bird species stop at the same places as others. So even if they don't wind up in the same breeding spot, a lot of these different species will stop at the same migratory spots, which again increases the chances, just because of density of individuals, that some of these things can jump from one species or one individual to another. So to malaria specifically, they infect blood cells. And they do that for all terrestrial vertebrates, primates, bats, rodents, And this happens via the transmission via the dipteran vector. And I'll tell you what those are in just a minute. But what we see as we look at these things globally is that there are several malaria lineages that seem really, really good at infecting a lot of different species. On the other hand, we have some malaria lineages that are more specialist. They only infect a limited number of species. From what we know so far, some of that can be said, but that's where we're kind of at right now. Some things just are jumping around all over. There's one in particular that I think has been found on every continent now. So these things are getting around. So this is how this is happening. You get sexual reproduction of these hemisporidians in the insect. Insect bites bird. You go through asexual reproduction. Mosquito comes and bites that bird again. We go through that sexual phase. So if we can get rid of this, those hemisporidians are effectively knocked out, right? I mean, the bird could still be carrying it, but if that insect vector can't do that, if it can't do the sexual reproduction in the insect vector, then it basically stops. So there are three main malaria lineages. One is Plasmodium, that's transmitted by that guy, mosquito. One is Leucocytozoa, and that's black flies. And then we have Hemiproteus, which is biting midges and louse flies. So these bugs each have different habitat requirements. They have different temperature tolerances. They have different water needs. So for those of us from the U.S., where do mosquitoes like to hang out? In still water, right? So just static ponds, you're going to find a lot of mosquito larvae. As you start to get running water, that's where you start to see these guys do their thing. So major effects on host fitness, and just for one example of this, study was done on blood parasites in Hemiproteus, reducing survival in a wild bird. So this is a blue tit. So they screened the population for infections. They gave them some individuals anti-malarial drugs to try to clear an infection. 10 days later, they sampled that blood, and then they just tracked them across years to see who survived better. So what happened? Who survived better?
The ones that were medicated.
The ones that were medicated, but both males and females? It turns out not. So here's our survival probability. Medicated females actually survive much better. There's no statistical difference here in men. So these females are having a longer term effect if they have been parasitized by malaria. But if they're cleared, they can take all those resources that would be used to fight off the infection, and they can jack it back into more eggs and things for their long-term fitness. Right? So we know these things have a very direct impact on individual fitness. So what happens with naive hosts? So have you heard of this before? Malaria hitting Hawaii? Well, then I'm going to tell you about it. So Hawaii, one of the islands anyway. So what they did in this study was, we know that there were no native mosquitoes to Hawaii before 1826. And what happened in 1826? People in boats. So they brought those with, right? So when that happened, well, we know that there are no native mosquitoes, but Plasmodium was introduced in the early 20th century. These are endemic birds to Hawaii, a lot of different Hawaii honey creeper species. So these are naive hosts because Hawaii had never had mosquitoes, so it could never have had malaria. Then you get the non-native birds that people bring in as pets, and they get loose. So what happened in the system to the naive guys? Yep, a lot of these got wiped out. They're just gone. So all we have is pictures of a lot of these things. Nothing really happened with the non-native birds. So this is kind of a story of not only the extinction side of things, but also elevation. So those mosquitoes, remember I said that those insect vectors have different life history strategies, different things that they need to be able to reproduce. Mosquitoes, very few of them, about 1,500 meters. And that would be here on this map. So there's still a lot of area that's above that 15 meters. Above 15 meters, those parasites can't go through the sexual phase in the insects. So some of those bird species went completely extinct, particularly those were at lowland elevations, but some that had higher level populations were able to survive because the mosquitoes couldn't get up there. And now that there's been enough time that has passed, that a lot of those things that were restricted, those bird species that were restricted to highlands, have been able to move back down because they're no longer naive hosts. They're able to deal with those infections much better. But we still lost all kinds of species. So, I mean, huge mortality levels. And I just said that. I tend to put too much stuff on slides. So this is another island system, and this is a study we worked on quite a while ago. So basically what we're doing when we're sampling these things is just doing a pinprick in an artery on the wing, taking a little blood. We're doing stuff in the lab to get molecular sequences, and then we're looking to determine if those sequences are new or not. So this is Sardinia. And just to show you, we did different elevations, we did different habitats, and you can see that prevalence, it does vary among these habitats and elevations, right? So, and it's what's it going to be tied to is if it's going to be those insects and their reproductive ability. So this is just an example to show you that these are our 3 malaria lineages, and just see by the pie chart, gray is not infected, but you can see that there's different colors in these different charts, and that's again going to be reflected in whether there's elevational differences, whether there's water differences, whether there's temperature differences as we start to move up slopes. So just a quick example that these things are differentially affecting these different parasite lineages. So the occurrence probability is going up, elevation is going this way. So for Plasmodium, as we're getting higher in elevation, the occurrence probability is going to go down. So it's just like we saw in Hawaii. You see the same thing in Sardinia. Same thing with Hamaproteus, so those biting midges. But for black flies, the occurrence probability goes up as we increase elevation. So those black flies are able to get up into those colder habitats. And so the malaria can still reproduce in those things because the bugs are able to survive quite well up there. This is just a fancy way of showing you that we have these 3 different lineages, and these are all the different species that we found infected. And you can see that these arrows, so leukocytozoans, are infecting a lot of different bird species. Hamaproteus are as well. So it's not just the genus isn't restricted to a particular species, but lineages within those genera can potentially be restricted to just one species that are infected. So one thing that we found that was interesting was that we looked at the probability of unique Sardinian haplotypes, because we recovered a lot of them, 84 new haplotypes. So does everybody know what a haplotype is? I have to explain that. How much time do you got? Chunk of DNA sequence, 100 base pairs long from Chris, and then 100 from Aden. If there's even one difference in there, it's a different lineage. Okay, so 84 things that we found were new. Of 116 that we covered, that's a crazy amount. But almost all of them, or the highest proportion of them, were in sedentary birds. That means when these things got infected on Sardinia, we started to see a lot of lineage diversification. But that wasn't true with long-distance migrants. They really weren't bringing new things, nor were short-distance migrants bringing new things. So things that come to the island breeding and are gone. We didn't find nearly as many lineages as we did on birds that were sedentary. So there's a potential answer for why we saw so many new things. And post World War II, human malaria has been endemic to Sardinia since then. And after World War II, they took some crazy amount of 267 metric tons of DDT and just dumped it on the island. So if you don't know this, DDT bad. They also drained a huge amount of swamp. And the combined effect was a complete reduction in the breeding habitat for mosquitoes by nearly 100%. And after they did this, there were 0 human cases of malaria reported just a few years later. So, I mean, this isn't exactly 100%. So that means that some of those mosquitoes likely survive. And so what happens when you get a huge population reduction just down to a few individuals? You get a population bottleneck, and then you start to get evolution happening again. And so we think what happened is they wiped out most of the lineages. A few of those lineages survived, and then they were able to diversify like crazy, and that explains these new lineages. And there's a point to this in a few minutes, probably. So again, some of these things that we can look at, do these fancy things in R, which is why I need students. So things like maximum rain, maximum temperature, so things that, I mean, we might have to consider in Iceland, right? Minimum rain, minimum temperature. NDVI is just is a measure of greenness, how green a particular grid cell is, which we don't have to worry about too much in Iceland because there's only 3 trees. And again, infection probability goes up with some up or down with some of these different factors. And this is just a heat map showing you infection probability getting to these hotter colors. So you can see that across all the things that we found were parasitized, only a few groups were actually showing huge levels of parasitism. So again, there are some bird species that seem to be hammered by malaria, and one of them is that blue tit that I told you about a minute ago. So in general, we find in these studies that parasitism levels decrease with latitudinal increase. But we know that Alaska now has malaria. Other things like highly pathogenic avian influenza has been found as far south as the Falkland Island. And it just recently was found in Svalbard from a couple of tundra swans, but also in Arctic foxes that were preying on the tundra swans. So these diseases are going all over the place. And so part of my reason for doing this underlying thing was climate change, which I thought was going to get the grant pulled, or the proposal pulled, given things that are happening. And but I mean that's the whole point is this stuff moving north, and can we track it, and can we maybe by doing some modeling predict what's going to happen if it gets a degree warmer, Celsius warmer, or 2 degrees Celsius warmer? How fast and how far could that potentially go? So I haven't been able to get out to do any sampling yet, which is why I just ran you through all this other stuff. The birds haven't gotten here, or my host has just been busy with courses and things, and we just have, and the wind's just down. So we haven't really been able to get out yet, but we're hoping to do that starting this weekend. So what might we expect to find? So there's enough variation in habitats and in water types. So if you look at Lake Nevat, it's just a big lake, and we know there are non-biting midges there, but I don't know if anybody's ever looked for biting midges. So there's enough habitat variation, there's enough water variation that all these things could potentially be here. We know. Hang on. Unlike Hawaii, elevation is probably not a factor. I mean, there's elevational relief on Iceland, but if you get up above a certain level, it's really cold. And so there's just no habitat up there for for these vectors to reproduce, right? So another thing we might expect is that we might be getting transmission to Iceland, or the potential for transmission to Iceland from possible migrants. There's a lot of migrants that go to Europe from Africa, as I said, but there are also things that go from Europe to Iceland, and there are things that go from Africa to Iceland that come here and breed. So 47 of the breeding birds on Iceland are actually migratory. So and that's about half of all species here. So there's a real potential for this stuff to get here through these migrants. Africa, huge malaria exposure, and a lot of parts of Europe as well. So these things are going there wintering, potentially bringing all that with them. So the potential is clearly possible for migrating birds. The big question is whether it's warm enough for Haemosporidians to go through the sexual phase and subsequently transmit that malaria. This is a study that was done, a master's thesis that was done in 2018, looking at avian Haemosporidians and Iceland redwings, so the robin equivalent for your gringos. They actually found a 14% positive for the black fly transmission. So 14% of the birds that they looked at had avian malaria. And importantly, that included birds of the year. So some of these redwings are migrants from the continent, others are now sedentary. But if there are juvenile birds here that have malaria, that means that it's here. It wasn't just brought along, right? And that's just for the black flies. So what I expect might happen is that we're going to have a higher proportion of malaria positives in migrant species. It just makes sense because of where they're coming from. Recovered malaria lineages are most likely going to be widespread generalists and not those specialized things that I talked about, at least initially. But if we get a sweep through Iceland, I would expect to see the same kind of pattern that we saw for Sardinia, that we would have a lot of those sedentary birds all of a sudden getting these unique lineages. I'd expect a lower proportion of positives in resident birds. Not really expecting to find Plasmodium in resident species yet, but what's the problem there? What just happened last fall?
Mosquito.
Oh, mosquitoes were found in Iceland for the first time last fall. There were just 3 of them, but I heard somebody offhand telling me that now that people are starting to look for them, somebody in the south part of the country found a bunch of them in their barn. So the mosquitoes are here, but we're back to the same question is it warm enough for that sexual phase to happen and for things to start really transmitting here? So as climate continues to warm, the extreme possibility is that most resident species, being naive hosts, will undergo a population crash like the birds in Hawaii did, but without the benefit of having elevation to escape. So that's kind of what we're expecting to find. And that's the end of the talk. Okay, yeah.
Oh, yes. So you can take a question or two. We're ending on a very positive note. Well, yes.
Yeah, Gary, thanks for the super positive and optimistic talk.
Pays the bills.
What that should be done to prevent that from happening?
I don't know what.
Dump 99 tons of DDT.
You could drop a lot of DDT.
Then, yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so with the DDT situation, right, so that's great, the mosquitoes were gone, but then what, did they look at other environmental like fallout from that?
Not in the study where I found it. I'm sure somebody did, but it just wasn't linked to the study that I was looking specifically at.
So I was wondering, and this may be a stupid question, but is there any risk of that then going to other species? I'm thinking of the very vulnerable animals in this country because they're also isolated. Whatever they are, whether they're lambs, horses, cows, I mean, there is no importation because we're keeping them so isolated, but
Probably not, because most of I don't know of a case where avian malaria has shown up in any group. There would have to be some pretty serious changes in the molecular makeup to jump from birds, for example, to mammals.
Yeah.
So there's your happy note.
that's at least positive. All right, well, thank you so much. Let's give a hand to Gary. So I think actually we should give a round of applause to everyone who spoke in the second round. So we're at the end of today's program, and I mean, again, I want to thank everyone who participated and attended, whether it was in person or virtually. And I really hope and I believe that you probably enjoyed this as much as I did. We have showcased 9 very different projects today, each one having its own value and each one equally fascinating, right, in its own way. And that's what I love about Fulbright. We get to foster so many different types of projects from all over the US. And that we have as well. We have people here from many different areas in the United States. And I, at least after these Fulbright forums, always leave feeling very inspired and very hopeful, and thankful for the Fulbright program, which allows all of the people that we bring over to enrich our society, and they really do. And I think it's so evident from the presentations that we've heard today that everybody has brought a lot. Everybody is taking a lot with them, but everybody has also brought so much and enriched this society so much. So again, thanks to all of you who presented, and you did a tremendous job. You made us proud at Fulbright Iceland. Some of you are going to be leaving soon, others later this summer, and some are even staying on longer term. But regardless, we look forward to staying in touch with you, whether you're going to be leaving Iceland in a few days or not. now you're joining a club, the Fulbright Iceland Alumni Club, very exclusive, it's a fabulous club. And also the club known as Islandsvinir, or Friends of Iceland, you may have heard that term bantered around. And so you're going to, be our alumni. We hope that you're going to stay connected to the commission. You're going to be champions of not just the Fulbright program, but especially Fulbright Iceland, because we really see you as our grantees. So I hope that we've built a lasting bond and, that you will work with us in the future to maintain and strengthen the commission and be great ambassadors of this program back in the US. You're our most valuable asset. You are what this is all about, you and your work. So thank you again for all your hard work, and a final round of applause. This May Fulbright Forum is often our last presentation event of the academic year, but we still have a few scholars who are staying until mid-August, and so they will be presenting in August. So please check our website and our social media for further details over the summer. We are saying, though, goodbye to those who are presenting today. So I'd like to invite you to come and have a little celebratory drink with us before we leave. And again, thank everyone who tuned in. Sorry that you can't be with us for our celebratory drink, but maybe we'll see you sometime. Until next time, let's continue to forge a better future with Fulbright. Thank you.